and welcome. Before we get into today's stories, be sure to subscribe to my channel. Also, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. On December 4th, 2017, something deeply unsettling came to light in the quiet Nebraska countryside. Investigators stumbled upon human remains stuffed into trash bags along a gravel road about an hour west of Wilbur. The search carried into the next day, turning up even more bags scattered in different spots. Inside were body parts, clothing, and even sex toys. Before long, the remains were identified as those of 24-year-old Sydney Loof. Sydney had already been missing for a couple of weeks. Back on November 16th, her mum reported her disappearance after Sydney didn't show up for her shift at Menards. When police went to her home in Lincoln, they noticed her car still in the driveway. Inside, her eyeglasses and purse were left behind, things she'd normally never leave without. But Sydney was gone. There were no obvious signs of a struggle, yet something was clearly wrong. Investigators checked her phone records and saw it had gone completely dark the night before, on November the 15th, at exactly 8:32 p.m. Digging deeper, police traced Sydney's recent activity and discovered she'd been using Tinder. A friend confirmed that she'd recently gone on a date with a woman who introduced herself as Audrey. But Audrey wasn't real. Her name was actually Bailey Boswell. That same friend even helped police by reaching out to Bailey again, still thinking she was Audrey, and managed to get her phone number. That number turned out to be a crucial lead, helping investigators identify Bailey and tie her to an apartment in Wilbur. Sydney's first date with Bailey had been on November 14th, 2017, at the basement apartment Bailey shared with her boyfriend, Aubrey Trail. Aubrey wasn't around that night. He and Bailey had rented a hotel near the Menards where Sydney worked. While Bailey was out with Sydney, Aubrey stayed at the hotel. Things seemed to go well because the two women agreed to meet again the next day, November 15th. But before that second date, Bailey and Aubrey went on a chilling shopping trip, stopping at Home Depot, Dollar General, and even the same Menards where Sydney worked. Their purchases painted a grim picture: a hacksaw, a utility knife with extra blades, wire cutters, bleach, an air freshener, protein bars, a thermometer, lighters, food grinders, drain cleaner, and trash bags. That evening, Sydney posted a final Snapchat message: "Ready for my date." Bailey picked her up and took her to the Wilbur apartment. At some point after they got there, Bailey and Aubrey killed her. They then dismembered her body and scattered the remains along back roads outside of town. When investigators later searched the Wilbur basement apartment, they didn't find anyone home. But what they did notice was a strong, unmistakable smell of bleach. The walls looked freshly scrubbed. The landlord would later recall that on November 16th, just one day after Sydney disappeared, the smell of bleach in the apartment had been so overpowering that one of his family members actually got sick from it. By then, Bailey and Aubrey were already on the run. From the road, they recorded videos for social media, claiming the police had the wrong people and denying they had anything to do with Sydney's disappearance. On November 30th, police finally tracked Aubrey Trail and Bailey Boswell to a motel in Branson, Missouri. When they were arrested, it wasn't for murder just yet. Instead, they were charged with carrying stolen merchandise, a completely separate crime. But their real intentions were hard to miss. With hiking boots, maps, and sleeping bags packed up, it was clear they were planning to run. Mexico was their destination. Even with the pair behind bars, the search for the truth continued. At first, neither Aubrey nor Bailey wanted to talk. Eventually, though, Aubrey started offering up confessions, but none of them ever lined up. In one story, he claimed he alone had killed Sydney. In another, he said she died after a third date with Bailey. Then, he switched it up again, saying her death happened during a sexual fantasy that spiraled out of control, caused by accidental choking. Later still, he gave yet another version, that he had been alone with Sydney and her death was an accident. The details kept changing, but investigators zeroed in on one part that couldn't be denied. Aubrey knew where Sydney's things were. He led police straight to a Wilbur cemetery, where they uncovered her phone, driver's license, and credit card, buried exactly where he said they'd be. As detectives pieced the case together, more about Aubrey and Bailey's backgrounds came out. Aubrey Clifton Trail was born on September the 7th, 1966. His childhood was rough. full of abuse and bouncing around foster homes. By his teen years, he'd already committed armed robbery and done time in prison. As an adult, his rap sheet grew: forgery, driving offences and other crimes. By 2017, he was living in that same basement apartment in Wilbur. Bailey Boswell's life looked very different, but ended up colliding with Aubrey's. She was born on February 26, 1994, almost 30 years younger than him. Raised in Iowa, Bailey's early life was marked by tragedy when her father was murdered during her childhood. Despite that, she excelled in sports, even landing a basketball scholarship offer. But instead of chasing that future, she got caught up in drugs and ended up with charges for drug paraphernalia. She later married a man named Freddie Purnell, and together they had a daughter. Living in Missouri, their substance use eventually cost them custody of the child. Afterward, Bailey started looking online for a sugar daddy. That's how she met Aubrey Trail. By May 2018, months after Sydney's remains had been found, the two pleaded guilty to federal fraud charges, admitting they had conned a Kansas couple out of $375,000. A month later, the charges everyone had been waiting for finally came: first-degree murder and improper disposal of human remains. In early 2019, things escalated further. Aubrey was hit with an additional charge of conspiracy to commit murder in February, and Bailey faced the same charge 6 months later. Both maintained their innocence. In June 2019, Aubrey admitted to the improper disposal charge, but still denied murder and conspiracy. Then, during a tense courtroom session that month, he stunned everyone, suddenly yelling, "Bailey was innocent, and I curse you all," before dragging a sharp piece of metal across his own neck, believed to be part of a razor blade. Aubrey was rushed to the hospital after that courtroom incident. Luckily, he survived. Even without his dramatic outburst, the evidence against him and Bailey was overwhelming. Cell phone records showed their devices near Sydney's at key moments. Surveillance footage connected them to buying bleach, hacksaws and trash bags in the days leading up to the murder. The Wilbur apartment reeked of bleach, a clear sign they had tried to clean up. On top of that, 3 women testified that Aubrey and Bailey had openly talked about wanting to record the torture and murder of victims, planning to sell the videos for profit. And of course, Aubrey had confessed repeatedly, even if his stories didn't always match. By July 2019, Aubrey Trail was convicted of murder and conspiracy. Bailey Boswell followed in October 2020, convicted on all charges. Sentencing came the next year. In June 2021, Aubrey was handed the death penalty, and in November 2021, Bailey was sentenced to life in prison. Okay, so today's story is about one of those creepy urban legends that, for a long time, people thought was just make-believe, until it turned out to be horrifyingly real. It was the evening of July 9th, 1987, when 12-year-old Jennifer Schweiger was walking alone along a quiet Staten Island street. Jennifer had Down syndrome, but she was independent, curious, and loved being outside. Her adoptive parents told her to be home before the sun went down, but that night, she didn't come back. At first, it seemed like the kind of missing child case Staten Island police had sadly seen before. Officers knocked on doors, volunteers searched through wooded areas, and missing posters started popping up on telephone poles. But then the whispers began. People weren't saying Cropsey, not yet anyway, but they were talking about a man who seemed to live in the shadows of the abandoned Willowbrook State School, Andre Rand. Rand wasn't some random stranger who'd blown into town. He'd been in Staten Island for years. Born Frank Rushan in 1944, he'd once worked as a custodian at Willowbrook back in the 60s, when the school was still running, and notorious for being overcrowded, filthy and abusive. In fact, Rand's name first landed in police records in a serious way in 1969, when he was caught luring a 9-year-old girl into his car and trying to assault her. Rand ended up serving 16 months in prison for sexual abuse. When he got out, his life was a mix of odd jobs, small-time arrests, and long stretches spent camping out in the woods or squatting in abandoned buildings. By the early 80s, though, his behaviour was getting, well, a lot weirder. One year, he actually picked up a bus full of 11 kids from a Staten Island YMCA, without telling anyone. drove them all the way to Newark Airport, hung out there for a few hours, and then just brought them back. His explanation? Just for fun. He got 10 months in jail for unlawful imprisonment. That alone would have been enough to make anyone side-eye him forever, but it gets darker. Since the early 1970s, kids had been disappearing around Staten Island, and in more than a few of those cases, Rand's name kept popping up. In 1972, 5-year-old Alice Pereira vanished from the lobby of her apartment building. People remembered seeing Rand in the area that day. She was never found. In 1981, 7-year-old Holly Ann Hughes went to the store to buy soap and never made it back. Neighbours swore they saw Rand's green Volkswagen creeping around the block that day. In 1983, 10-year-old Tia Heese Jackson walked out of a motel where her family was staying and didn't come back. Rand at the time was living in a graveyard nearby. Then, in 1984, 22-year-old Hank Gaforio, who was mentally disabled and had the mind of a child, left a diner with Rand. He was never seen again. In every single one of these cases, police suspected Rand, and in every single one they couldn't prove anything. But when 12-year-old Jennifer Schweiger disappeared in 1987, something felt different. People had seen Rand walking hand in hand with her just hours before she vanished, and at the time, he was living in a little makeshift camp on the overgrown, abandoned grounds of Willowbrook. Police picked Rand up for questioning, and of course, he denied everything. But just a week later, search volunteers made a grim discovery, a shallow grave hidden in the woods behind Willowbrook. Inside was Jennifer's body. The whole community was shaken. And now, the whispers weren't just about Andre Rand. They were about Cropsey. People started saying the legend had been real all along, and that he'd finally been caught. Rand's trial started in 1988. The prosecution didn't have a murder weapon. They didn't have DNA or other forensic evidence. What they did have were eyewitness accounts and circumstantial clues, and it was enough. The jury found him guilty of first-degree kidnapping. They couldn't all agree on a murder charge, but kidnapping alone got him 25 years to life. For the families of the other missing children, it was bittersweet. Sure, Rand was off the streets, but none of their kids' cases had been solved. It felt like there were still too many unanswered questions. Then, years later, in the early 2000s, detectives decided to take another hard look at one of those old cases. The 1981 disappearance of 7-year-old Holly Ann Hughes. This time, witnesses testified they'd actually seen Holly getting into Rand's car. Holly's mother told the court she recognized Rand's voice in a chilling ransom call she'd gotten days after her daughter vanished. A jailhouse informant even claimed Rand had bragged about killing her. In 2004, Rand was convicted of kidnapping Holly Ann Hughes and given another 25 years to life. Because his sentences were set to run one after the other, his first shot at parole wouldn't come until 2037, when he'd be 93 years old. When I think about the story of Andre Rand and the legend of Cropsey, what strikes me most is how folklore and reality sometimes overlap in unsettling ways. At first, Cropsey was just a cautionary tale. A boogeyman parents used to keep their kids close. You'd hear it at sleepovers or whispered on the playground, and everyone assumed it was just another scary story meant to keep us from wandering off. But when a real man's crimes began to mirror the legend, it blurred the line between myth and truth in a way that still feels deeply eerie. It's one thing to hear about a monster in the woods. It's another to realize that the monster is actually a person, someone who walks the same streets you do, someone who could pass you in a grocery store and you'd never know. That's the kind of thing that shakes a community's sense of safety to its core, because it forces you to accept that sometimes the scariest monsters aren't made up at all. They're flesh and blood, they look like anyone else, and they can live right down the street. It's also disturbing to see how many times Rand's name came up over the years without him being stopped for good. From the early 1970s onward, there were multiple disappearances where he was a suspect, and yet each time there wasn't enough evidence to lock him away permanently. That's not necessarily because the police weren't trying. Proving crimes like these without physical evidence is notoriously difficult, but the pattern is hard to ignore. Case after case, his name hovered around the edges, like smoke that you can smell but can't see. And it makes you wonder, how many opportunities were there to prevent another tragedy? How many lives could have been saved if the system had been able to act sooner? That's the frustrating, heartbreaking part of true crime. Sometimes the warnings are there, sometimes people suspect the truth, but without hard proof, nothing sticks. It's a reminder that justice often comes too late, and when it finally does, it's rarely enough to erase the pain that's already been done. Finally, this case really makes me think about how we process fear and danger as communities. The legend of Cropsey gave people a kind of shorthand for evil, a way to explain something they couldn't fully understand. It was a story that said, stay close, stay safe, because there's something out there that wants to harm you. But once Rand was arrested, the myth became tethered to a real face and name, and that changed everything. Staten Island could no longer dismiss Cropsey as just a bedtime scare. Now, it was part of their history. In a strange way, the legend had been warning people all along, even if no one realized it. And yet, even with Rand behind bars for the rest of his life, the story doesn't feel finished. Too many families still live without closure, without answers, without even a body to lay to rest.
Anything could happen. Being a female, you could be raped, robbed if you're a male, all the way to where you could be killed. Once you get in that other person's car, you're at their mercy.
On the morning of December 28th, 1986, something unsettling was found on an unfinished off-ramp near Mercy Road, just off Interstate 15. Sitting alone on the empty stretch of pavement was a pale blue 1968 Volkswagen Beetle. The driver's side window was rolled halfway down, the keys were still in the ignition, and a woman's purse sat in plain sight on the seat. Investigators also noticed a Chevron gas receipt inside, time-stamped from the night before. It didn't look like a car that had just been ditched without thought. It seemed carefully left behind. Only a short distance away, a steep ravine stretched under the old highway 395 bridge. When authorities searched below, their fears were realized. At the bottom of the gorge was the body of 20-year-old Cara Evelyn Knott. She had been strangled and thrown from the bridge, her life ending in the shadows of the interstate. Cara's family had already known something was wrong. The night before, December 27th, she had driven north to Escondido to see her boyfriend, Wayne, who was sick with the flu. She left around 8:30 p.m, planning to be back at her parents' house in El Cajon not long after. It was only a 45-minute drive, but by the time 10 o'clock rolled around and there was still no sign of her, her parents began to panic. They drove the highways themselves, called hospitals, and searched desperately, but there was no trace of their daughter. The next morning, when her brother-in-law joined the search, he came across the abandoned Beetle, and that's when the nightmare truly began. Not just for Cara's family, but for her whole community and eventually the entire state of California. Born on February 11th, 1966, Cara Knott was the kind of person who made an impression. She was a junior at San Diego State University, studying to become a teacher, and she still lived at home with her parents in El Cajon. To friends and family, she was full of warmth, determination, and promise. The kind of young woman who had so much ahead of her. That's partly what made her murder so hard to comprehend. She was living a completely ordinary life, trusting of authority and full of youthful optimism. When investigators began their work, the first step was ruling out the obvious suspects. Wayne, her boyfriend, was quickly cleared thanks to a solid alibi. Witnesses at the Chevron station also confirmed seeing Cara there alone, filling up her Beetle, calm and unbothered. Nothing suggested she'd been forced or threatened. In fact, it looked like she had pulled over willingly, and that detail was what unsettled detectives the most. Who could convince a young woman to stop her car late at night without making her afraid? Before long, suspicion started pointing in an unexpected direction. Law enforcement itself. In January 1987, only a few weeks after Cara's death, her case was highlighted on a Crime Stoppers TV broadcast. One of the officers who appeared was California Highway Patrolman Craig Pyer, who was well known for patrolling that same stretch of Interstate 15. But something about him stood out. On camera, viewers couldn't miss the fresh scratches across his face. Not long after, women began coming forward with stories of their own, stories that made the connection even clearer. They said Paya had pulled them over at the very same isolated Mersey Road off-ramp where Kara's car had been found. People who had dealt with him described his behaviour as unsettling. The way he lingered, the tone he took, the way he used his authority in ways that didn't feel right. Craig Paya wasn't just another CHP officer, he had built a reputation on the force. Born on March 16th, 1950, he joined the California Highway Patrol in 1973 and spent years patrolling the corridor from Escondido to San Diego. Among his co-workers, he was considered aggressive, the kind of officer who pushed hard. And back then, that was often praised as dedication. But behind the polished uniform, his personal life was much messier. By the mid-1980s, Paya had already gone through 2 failed marriages. His third marriage, just a year and a half old at the time of Kara's murder, looked on the surface like it might settle him down. But the way he behaved on the highways told a different story. Prosecutors later laid out a chilling account of what they believed happened the night of December 27th. After spotting Kara at the Chevron station, Paya followed her in his marked patrol car. Using his lights and loudspeaker, tools meant to protect people, he directed her to exit at the lonely, unfinished Mersey Road off-ramp. It was not a place she ever would have chosen to stop. What began as a routine traffic stop twisted into something far darker. When Kara resisted his advances, he struck her with his flashlight, knocking her unconscious. Afraid of being exposed, he strangled her with a rope. Then, as though carrying out a grim routine, he lifted her body onto the hood of his patrol car, drove to the old Highway 395 bridge, and in the cover of night, hurled her into the ravine below. When it was over, he simply returned to duty, acting as if nothing had happened. The case against him came together quickly. On January 15th, 1987, less than 3 weeks after Kara's death, Paya was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. But the fight for justice wasn't straightforward. His first trial in February 1988 ended in deadlock. 7 jurors voted to convict while 5 wanted to acquit. A mistrial was declared, leaving Kara's family to relive the ordeal again. 4 months later, a second trial began, this time with a new prosecutor and additional evidence. The result was far more decisive. Craig Paya was convicted of murder and, in August 1988, sentenced to 25 years to life. He became eligible for parole after 17 years, but hearings in 2004, 2008, and 2012 all denied him release. His next chance at parole is set for 2027. But even with Paya behind bars, the pain didn't end. For the Knott family, tragedy seemed relentless. On November 30th, 2000, Kara's father, John Samuel Knott, collapsed from a fatal heart attack at the age of 63. He was tending to the memorial garden he had built for his daughter, just steps from where her body had once been found. For the Knotts, grief became a constant companion. Meanwhile, Paya's own family life unravelled as well. His third wife, who had once stood by him through the trial and sentencing, eventually left him around 2007, ending their marriage and leaving him to face the consequences of the life he'd destroyed.
Of your vehicle and spend the night than to try to walk and get assistance. Now let's step up in front of the patrol car.
Because if you do decide to walk, the CHP says you never know who you may meet along the road.
Anything can happen. Being a female, you could be raped, robbed if you're a male, all the way to where you could be killed. Once you get in that other person's car, you're at their mercy.
The gas tank is broken under the bottom, right? And you can't fill it up.
The bottom line, though, is that preventing all this trouble is easy. Be sure your car works, and as simple as it sounds, be sure you've got gas. Because even if you're lucky enough to get some, you still may be taking your life in your own hands.
Do you realize how dangerous it is?
Yes, I
This is Nur Mazna Binti Ismailian, better known as Mona Fandey. And let me just say, you've probably never heard of a bizarre story like this. Now, Mona didn't start out as one of Malaysia's most infamous names. Back in the 80s, she actually wanted to be a pop star. In 1987, she even released an album called Diana with help from her husband, Muhammad Noor Afandi. But the album tanked, and her music dreams fizzled out. Instead of giving up entirely, Mona and Effendi completely reinvented themselves as Bomo, traditional healers who claimed they could tap into spiritual powers. They started attracting high-paying clients, including politicians looking for an extra push in their careers. By the early 90s, business was booming. The couple had 5 mansions, luxury cars like Jaguars and Mercedes, and a lavish lifestyle, all funded by their secretive occult work. Then, in 1993, they met Datuk Maslan Idris, a Pahang state assemblyman with big political ambitions. He wanted to be Menteri Besar, chief minister, and he believed Mona could help him. Mona promised him a powerful talisman, a cane, and a songkok supposedly owned by Indonesia's first president Sukarno. The price? 2.5 million ringgit, with half paid up front. Maslan agreed. A few weeks later, he was gone. On July 2nd, 1993, after withdrawing nearly 300,000 ringgit in cash, Maslan went to meet Mona in Robe. That was the last time anyone saw him alive. Not long after, Mona and Effendi were on a wild spending spree, buying a brand new Mercedes, gold jewellery and home appliances, all paid for in 1,000 ringgit notes. Mona even checked into a KL hospital for major plastic surgery, leaving her friends wondering why she suddenly wanted a whole new face. But questions started piling up. Where was Maslan, and why were Mona and Effendi suddenly splurging? The horrifying answer came on July 22nd, 1993. Acting on a tip, police searched a remote rubber estate. Inside a locked storeroom, they broke open a concrete slab and uncovered a gruesome scene. Buried 6 feet down was Maslan's body, cut into 18 pieces. His head had been severed with 3 heavy blows, there were no signs he fought back, and parts of his body, including his genitals, were missing. Next to the body was what looked like a ritual setup: blood-stained tiles, carved idols, knives, an axe, and clay statues of Hindu gods, including a 10-armed Durga. Bottles nearby even seemed to contain human organs. This wasn't just murder. It looked like an occult sacrifice. The case gripped Malaysia, and the big break came by pure chance. Earlier that month, on July 13th, police had arrested the couple's assistant, Juraimi Hassan, on a minor drug charge. During questioning, Juraimi spilled everything. Juraimi didn't just talk. He drew a rough map of the storeroom and took police straight to Maslan's grave. By late October 1993, the whole plot was starting to come apart. Even Noor Effendi, Mona's husband, eventually gave in and personally led detectives to the exact burial spot. When officers dug under that locked shed, about 5 feet down, they brought up what was left of Maslan piece by piece. Every day seemed to reveal something new. Witnesses from Maslan's office confirmed that on the day he disappeared, he'd cashed personal checks worth 289,000 ringgit. Hotel staff remembered seeing him in a taxi with Noor Effendi that same night, July 2nd. Surveillance footage even caught Mona buying gold jewellery, one piece engraved with Maslan's name. The forensic evidence painted a brutal picture. Pathologists testified that Maslan had been lured to the house, killed instantly by a massive blow to the neck, and had never even fought back, a sign he'd trusted his killers. Fast forward to September 1994, about 15 months after the murder, and the 3 accused finally stood trial at the Temelo High Court: Mona, Noor Effendi, and Juraimi. Before a 7-person jury, all 3 pleaded not guilty. The prosecution wasted no time setting the scene. They claimed Maslan had been tricked into thinking he was taking part in a black magic ceremony to boost his political career, complete with a flower bath and chanting. In reality, it was a carefully staged trap. Prosecutor Zakaria Sam told the jury that Mona had asked Maslan to lie down in a candlelit bathroom, place a fresh orchid on his forehead, and wait for a mysterious voice. The moment Maslan closed his eyes, things turned deadly. At Mona's signal, Noor Effendi nodded and Juraimi swung the axe. The prosecutors then walked the jury through what happened after. Maslan's body hacked apart, buried under cement, his money quickly spent. They accused Mona and Effendi of splurging 140,000 ringgit on luxury goods while Maslan's disappearance was still being investigated. Proof, they argued, that the murder was all about money. The medical examiner confirmed that Maslan had died instantly from that neck wound. Even the towels Mona and Afandi claimed were for cleansing bad luck reeked of blood in the police photos. Through it all, Mona acted like she was at a press event, not a murder trial. Reporters described her sitting in the dock, smiling, waving, and even blowing kisses during breaks. She wore bright outfits and greeted photographers like old friends. To many watching, it felt like Mona had finally gotten the fame she'd wanted, just in the most twisted way possible. By early 1995, the jury had heard enough. On February 9th, 1995, they found all three guilty of Maslan's murder. Judge Mokhtar Sidin didn't hesitate to sentence them to death by hanging. The courtroom went quiet, except Mona, who stayed perfectly calm. Outside, she smiled broadly, told reporters, "I am happy with the decision and I thank Malaysians," and blew more kisses. Her bizarre confidence only made the case more unforgettable. Mona and her two co-accused didn't go quietly, at least not at first. They appealed the verdict, but one by one every appeal failed. In 1999, the federal court upheld the death sentences, and when they turned to the Royal Pardons Board for clemency, that too was denied. Prison records show that Mona spent her last years in a much quieter way than she had lived, reading the Quran, praying, and keeping mostly to herself. On the night before their execution, Mona, Noor Afandi and Juraimi shared one final meal. Kentucky Fried Chicken. No feasts, no extravagance, just a humble fast food dinner. Then came the morning of November 2nd, 2001. As the first light crept over Kajang prison, the long, strange saga reached its end. Just before sunrise, the three of them were led to the gallows and hanged, one after another. A prison official later said they showed no fear, no sign of regret. Mona, in particular, was unsettlingly calm. According to witnesses, even as the noose was tightened around her neck, she looked composed and uttered the words, "Aku takkan mati," I will never die, before falling silent forever. Hearing Mona Fande's story leaves me with an uneasy mix of fascination and revulsion. On one hand, it's hard to believe how someone could so fully blur the line between performance and reality, turning a murder trial into her own twisted stage. But honestly, it's scary how greed, manipulation, and blind belief in superstition can drag people into something this dark. The gory details are bad enough, but what really gets me is the mind game behind it all. How charm, confidence, and a bit of theatrics managed to hide just how cruel it really was. And those last words from Mona, "I will never die," almost feel like they came true, because people in Malaysia still talk about her. In a weird way, she ended up getting the fame she always wanted, but at a price no one should ever pay. Someone's life, her own freedom, and a story so chilling it still gives people goosebumps today. On the muggy afternoon of July 27th, 1981, Hollywood, Florida felt ordinary. 6-year-old Adam Walsh trotted alongside his mother, Reve, through the bustling Hollywood Mall. It was a routine errand. Reve was shopping for a lamp at the Sears department store while Adam was happily occupied with the video games on display a few aisles away. The boy's eyes lit up at the sight of the blinking Atari console and the toy aisle packed with wonders. In that moment, Adam's world was as pure and simple as any kid's. Just minutes before, he'd been laughing. By the afternoon, everything would turn into a nightmare. There's a photo from those happier times. Adam holding his baseball bat, wearing his bright red cap, grinning wide with a gap where his front tooth should be. The very picture of childhood. Inside Sears, Adam was totally caught up in the Atari games, and all the toys nearby. Not far away, store manager Arnold noticed a commotion. A security guard was shooing off some older boys who'd been messing around. The guard asked if their parents were in the store. They said no. Adam, shy as he was, didn't say anything when the guard herded the older boys toward a side exit. In a heartbreaking misunderstanding, the guard assumed Adam was with them and sent him out too. The older kids bolted across the parking lot into the bright Florida sun, leaving Adam standing there confused and alone on the curb. When Reve came back from the lamp department, her heart dropped. Adam wasn't where she'd left him. She paged him over the store's loudspeaker, calling, "Adam! Adam!" Then she tore through the aisles, calling his name, her voice getting more and more desperate. For over an hour, she and her mother-in-law, Jean, who had rushed over to help, searched frantically. Still no sign of him. At 1:55 p.m, Reve made the call every parent dreads. She dialed 911 and reported Adam missing. The store went still except for the hushed whispers of fear. News spread quickly. The Walsh family dropped everything and poured all their energy into finding Adam. They went nationwide with appeals, even offering a $100,000 reward for his safe return. Television crews captured John and Reve on camera, pleading for help. Later, John spoke bitterly about those early days. When Adam was kidnapped, the FBI did not help us, he told reporters. The FBI refused to enter Adam in the NCIC. There was no missing children's file, nothing. Back then, law enforcement databases tracked stolen cars and boats, but not missing kids. The Walshes felt like they were fighting alone. 13 days later, the worst possible news came. On August 10th, 2 fishermen along the Florida Turnpike, about 100 miles north of Hollywood, found a child's severed head in a drainage canal. The tiny face was unmistakable. Across the state, John and Reve had spent nearly 2 weeks begging and praying for their son's safe return. Now, the authorities brought them the unthinkable truth. It was Adam. John's mum just crumpled to the floor. When he tried to talk, his voice cracked, and at the press conference afterward, all he could manage to get out was, "I was dying of a broken heart." Adam's head was the only thing they ever found. His body never turned up. The death certificate said asphyxiation, but for the Walsh family the real cause felt far worse than any official word could capture. Over the next few years, investigators struggled to piece together what had happened to Adam. Eventually their focus landed on a drifter named Otis Toole. By 1983, Toole was already imprisoned for other crimes. During interviews he started talking about Adam in a way that made people's blood run cold. He claimed he'd grabbed Adam outside a Sears, driven toward Jacksonville, tempted him with candy and toys, then hid him when he cried. Toole said he strangled the boy with a seatbelt and then decapitated him with a machete. Sometimes he went even further, saying that he and another killer, Henry Lee Lucas, had burned Adam's remains. But there was never a shred of physical evidence to prove that part. After a while, Toole took it all back, and then confessed again. The whole thing turned into this maddening back and forth. Truth one day, lies the next, until nobody knew what to believe. To make matters worse, crucial evidence mysteriously vanished. Police somehow lost a piece of carpet from Toole's Cadillac that supposedly had blood on it. Then the entire car disappeared from evidence altogether. Without that, and without Adam's remains, there was nothing solid to link Toole to the murder. When Toole died in prison in 1996 from cirrhosis, prosecutors admitted they had no real case to bring. Hollywood's police chief Chad Wagner even apologized later, saying leads had been dropped and evidence hadn't been handled right. For the Walshes, each year that passed without answers was just another layer of frustration. In the late 2000s, another wild theory popped up, this time involving Jeffrey Dahmer. People remembered that in 1981, Dahmer had been living in Miami Beach, not far from Hollywood, and rumors swirled that he might have been in the area the day Adam vanished. 2 witnesses even came forward. One said they saw a blonde man they thought looked like Dahmer near the toy section, and another claimed they saw a child being forced into a blue van. Dahmer, after all, had a history of severing heads and, coincidentally, drove a blue van for work. Police did interview him about Adam's case back in 1992, but Dahmer denied everything. He even said that if he'd done it, he would have admitted it, just like he had with all his other crimes. John Walsh later said he never saw any evidence tying Dahmer to Adam's disappearance. Eventually, that theory fizzled out like all the others. With no one to charge, John and Reve decided to channel their grief into action. Their home soon filled with letters, more than 40,000 from people all over the world, each one simply addressed to Adam's parents. On July 27th, 2006, exactly 25 years after Adam vanished, President George W. Bush signed the Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act into law. John and Reve stood on the White House lawn as it became official. The law created a National Sex Offender Registry, toughened federal penalties for crimes against children, and required every police department to have a fast response plan for missing kids. Adam's name was also immortalized in Code Adam alerts at major retailers, and his face, along with so many others, became familiar on milk cartons across America. Nearly 30 years after Adam disappeared, the Walshes finally heard the words they had been waiting for and dreading. On December 16, 2008, Hollywood Police Chief Chad Wagner held a press conference announcing the case would be closed. He named Otis Toole, the man who had twice confessed in the 1980s, as Adam's killer. There was no new forensic proof, but Wagner said the circumstantial evidence was beyond a reasonable doubt. In the audience, John and Revy sat quietly. John let go of decades of anger with one line: "We can now move forward knowing positively who killed our little boy." After 27 years of uncertainty, they finally had someone to hold responsible. On the night of February 6, 2021, 911 operators in New Haven started getting a flood of panicked calls. A man had been shot in the East Rock neighborhood, right near the corner of Lawrence and Nichols Streets. When police got there, they found Kevin Jiang, a Yale grad student, lying in the street about 100 feet away from his silver Toyota Prius. He had been shot multiple times up close. Scattered all around him were 8 spent .45 caliber shell casings. His Prius was still sitting there with its hazard lights flashing into the cold night. Neighbors told police they'd seen a dark SUV tearing away from the area, its headlights off. Not long after, surveillance cameras backed that story up. The video showed Kevin's Prius driving first, then a dark SUV following closely behind. The SUV rammed into the back of the Prius, forcing Kevin to pull over. His hazards came on. The SUV backed up, clipped another car, then stopped. Kevin got out of his Prius and walked toward the SUV. And then it all happened fast. 2 gunshots, a scream, then 6 more shots. Seconds later, the SUV rolled away past Kevin's car with no lights, disappearing into the night. Another camera nearby even caught it heading toward the on-ramp for Interstate 91 North. This wasn't just a random act of violence. It was a cold, deliberate killing, and what made it worse was that it fit into a disturbing pattern. Kevin's murder wasn't the first time New Haven police had been dealing with incidents involving a .45 caliber gun. A couple months earlier, on December 11, 2020, someone opened fire on a house over on Huntington Street. 5 shell casings from a .45 were found at the scene, but thankfully nobody inside was hurt. Then, on January 15, 2021, another house, this time on Stimson Road, was targeted. Only 1 casing turned up that time, but it didn't stop there. On February 5th, just 1 day before Kevin was killed, 2 more .45 caliber casings were found outside a house on Osborne Street. Cameras there caught a dark SUV speeding off, and even creepier, just hours before Kevin's murder on February 6th, yet another house, this one on Shepherd Street, was hit. 2 casings were recovered in the yard, and once again a dark SUV was seen in the area. Piece by piece it started to look like a pattern, random houses being shot at, escalating over weeks, leading straight up to a murder. To figure out what had happened, detectives had to start looking at the people in Kevin's life. And on the surface, Kevin seemed like someone with everything going for him. He'd already earned his bachelor's degree, and he was now at Yale working toward a master's in environmental science. He was also serving in the National Guard Reserves, disciplined, hard-working, and someone who lived to serve others. In his personal life, things were going well too. At Yale, Kevin started dating Zion Perry, an MIT grad who was now pursuing her PhD in molecular biophysics and biochemistry. The two of them had actually met at a church retreat in Connecticut in early 2020, and their relationship quickly grew serious. Just a week before Kevin's death, on January 31, 2021, the couple had announced their engagement on social media. But as investigators would soon find out, Zion had known someone else before Kevin. Back in January 2019, when she was part of a Christian fellowship group at MIT, she had become friends with another student there, a guy named Ching-Suan Pan. They were never romantically involved, but Pan's name would end up being central to this case. Ching-Suan Pan had been born in China on April 16, 1991, and grew up in Malden, Massachusetts. And although he seemed like just another smart, quiet MIT student at first, his presence in this story would eventually become impossible to ignore. From the time he was young, Chink Swan Pan stood out as a mathematical prodigy. He wasn't just good at math, he was exceptional. His talent eventually carried him all the way to the International Mathematical Olympiad in Germany, where he won a silver medal. That kind of promise opened doors, and Pan went on to MIT, where he pursued artificial intelligence as a PhD candidate. On paper, he looked like the kind of person destined for an impressive career. But outside of his academic world, his life seemed much quieter. He lived with his parents in Malden, Massachusetts, and kept a low profile. But beneath that quiet exterior, Pan was hiding darker behaviour. After Kevin Jiang's murder, police quickly zeroed in on him. Witnesses had described a dark SUV fleeing the scene, and surveillance video suggested it was a GMC Terrain. Not long after, officers actually found one, stuck on a set of railroad tracks near a North Haven scrapyard, and inside that vehicle was Pan. When questioned, he told police he had been trying to drive home to Massachusetts when he got stuck. He claimed the Terrain was a rental car, but when asked for paperwork, he had nothing to show them. To make things worse, officers noticed the license plate on the SUV had been reported as lost or stolen. The vehicle was seized and towed away. Police gave Pan a ride to a nearby Best Western hotel. During that process, he seemed unusually focused on a blue bag that had been left behind in the SUV, almost desperate to get it back. The next morning, employees at a nearby Arby's restaurant found several bags discarded outside. Inside the blue one was a Ruger .45 caliber handgun, multiple magazines, a gun case, and boxes of ammunition that matched the caliber used in Kevin's killing. Ballistics later showed that this particular Ruger hadn't fired the fatal bullets, but the ammunition inside was the same kind as what killed Kevin, and the bag itself carried a label reading City of Malden, Massachusetts, directly tying it back to Pan's hometown. As the investigation pushed forward, even more evidence piled up. Kevin's blood was discovered on the Terrain's gear shifter. The damage to Kevin's Prius matched perfectly with the license plate bracket on the Terrain. Investigators also learned that Pan had a habit of test driving GMC Terrains from dealerships in Massachusetts, and the timing of those test drives lined up with the strange string of earlier house shootings in New Haven. To top it off, the SUV found on the tracks had been stolen from a dealership in Mansfield, Massachusetts. And then came another connection. Pan was a Facebook friend of Zion Perry, Kevin's fiancée. Suddenly, the threads of the case were tightening. By February 10th, 2021, New Haven police publicly named Pan as a suspect in Kevin's murder. They warned he was armed and dangerous. Just a day later, police in Georgia pulled over Pan's parents, but Pan wasn't with them. His father explained that Pan had driven them south from Connecticut and then disappeared. Authorities kept tracking the family. In May, investigators spotted Pan's mother using a hotel phone to reach her son. And then, on May 14th, 2021, US Marshals finally caught up with him in Montgomery, Alabama. Pan had been hiding under the alias Henry Choi, living in an apartment and doing everything possible to avoid being noticed. When marshals arrested him, they found just how carefully he'd been planning to stay hidden. He was carrying 7 different cell phones, 7 SIM cards, $19,000 in cash, and even his father's passport. For months he had managed to stay one step ahead of law enforcement, but the chase was finally over. Pan was charged with Kevin Jiang's murder. The case dragged on for years. But more than 2 years after Kevin's death, on February 29th, 2024, Pan stood in court and pleaded guilty under a plea agreement. On April 23, 2024, he was sentenced to 35 years in prison. If he serves his full sentence, he will be...
And it's the day that Mandan police officers arrived at that same crime scene, conducted a protective sweep of the premises, and found not 1, not even 2, but 3 additional victims. William Cobb, Lois Cobb, and Adam Fuhrer. Each one covered in gunshot wounds and stab wounds.
Monday morning, April 1st, 2019, just another workday in Mandan, North Dakota. At 7:19 a.m., an employee parked outside RJR Maintenance and Management lit a cigarette, and prepared for another routine shift. Nothing seemed out of place until he stepped inside. The first thing he saw was Robert Fackler, his boss, lying on the floor. At first glance, Robert looked collapsed, maybe from a heart attack, but as the employee rushed closer, rolling him over, panic set in. Blood. Too much blood. Stab wounds. Not one, not two. Far more. This wasn't an accident. In that moment, everything changed. A normal day turned into something grotesque, surreal. Sirens were called in. Paramedics arrived expecting a medical emergency, only to be confronted with carnage. Robert wasn't alone. As officers pushed through the building, they uncovered more bodies, one after another. 3 men, 1 woman, 4 victims in total. Each brutally attacked, stabbed, shot. This wasn't just murder, it was slaughter, and whoever did it was already gone. Robert Fackler co-owned RJR Maintenance with his wife. Adam Fuhrer handled repairs from toilets to air conditioning. Bill and Lois Cobb managed maintenance and accounts, a married couple with 4 children and 3 grandchildren. Together with Robert and Adam, they were known around the office as the Coffee Club, always the first in.
I had a walkthrough scheduled of move out, and they never showed, and I came here to see what was going on, and I stayed. They've been great people to lease from, always very courteous and kind and caring, and so I just want to know that they're all right. They're good people.
On April 1st, 2019, each followed their usual patterns, unaware that a predator had chosen that day, that building, those people. Bill and Lois had their smoke, Adam made his rounds, Robert handled office matters, each unaware that the next step in their morning would be fatal. To the outside world, they were ordinary, trusted, safe. But that day, ordinary became horrifying. By the time officers arrived at the RJR offices, the scene was devastating. 4 people dead, stab wounds, gunshot wounds, blood everywhere. Mandan police had never faced a case like this in years. Detectives tried to piece together what had happened. Nothing about the scene suggested a struggle outside the victims. They had been attacked inside in different areas of the office. Whoever did this knew the building, knew the routines, knew exactly how to strike. CCTV footage was requested from the nearby buildings. Employees, tenants, neighbours, all were questioned. Nothing was routine anymore. Every detail mattered. Every moment leading up to that morning became a potential clue. In those first frantic hours, the puzzle pieces were scattered across Mandan. One thing was already clear. This was no random act. Someone had planned it. And the question hanging over the city was chilling. Who would do this, and why? Detectives combed through every frame of surveillance footage. From a camera across the street, a man appeared at 6:47 a.m., entering the RJR building. Less than 20 minutes later, he was seen leaving. Orange jacket, orange mask, dark pants, gloves, a methodical figure moving with purpose. By 7:08 a.m., he was gone, but not for long. Cameras picked him walking toward a parked Ford F-150 in a nearby McDonald's lot. That truck would become the thread connecting the chaos inside RJR to someone outside. Authorities issued a BOLO alert for the vehicle, and soon someone familiar with the truck noticed it. A county sheriff's lieutenant, one of Chad Isaac's patients. Details matched: markings, rust spots, stickers, unique identifiers. The connection was chilling, precise. By April 4th, only 3 days after the murders, law enforcement had their lead. Chad Trolan Isaac, 44, chiropractor, North Dakota native, living quietly in Washburn, was pulled over at a traffic stop. Scratches on his knees, bruises on his arms, his explanation, a dog and a fall. But the truck, the clothing, the weapons, everything painted a far darker picture. Inside his trailer, agents found bleach-scented clothing, a reversible mask, a bent-tip knife, shell casings, and shoes matching those seen on surveillance. Evidence was mounting, yet questions remained. Why would a seemingly ordinary man commit such brutality? And how had he planned it so meticulously? The net had closed, but the answers, the motive, the reasoning were still out of reach. Chad Trolan Isaac was, by all appearances, a quiet man, a chiropractor in Washburn, North Dakota, licensed since 2009, running a decade-long practice with no complaints, no criminal record. He lived alone in a modest trailer, kept to himself, and had minimal interactions with the RJR staff beyond being a tenant at one of their properties. Born in Riverdale, North Dakota, he graduated high school in 1992, then served 5 years in the US Navy, stationed in Hawaii. He married locally, had a daughter, and later divorced. Over time, he drifted through several states, studied nursing briefly, then returned to North Dakota to pursue chiropractic work. Friends, neighbors, patients. They described him as calm, quiet, unremarkable. But on April 4th, 2019, that calm facade shattered. Despite his ordinary life, everything pointed to him. From the methodical surveillance sightings to the discarded truck, to the meticulous planning of the murders, law enforcement now had a suspect whose calm exterior masked a terrifying capacity for violence. Chad Isaak was taken into custody, charged with 4 counts of murder, burglary, concealment of a vehicle, and unauthorized use of a vehicle. Life, as Mandan knew it, would never feel safe again. April 1st, 2019 began like any other morning, but inside RJR, the day had been meticulously planned. At 5:25 a.m., Chad parked his truck at a McDonald's lot, about a 15-minute walk from the office. He had already tested the route a week prior. By 6:30 a.m., Bill and Lois Cobb arrived. 15 minutes later, Chad followed, entering the building. Adam Fuhrer walked in at 7:06 a.m., Robert Fackler at 7:06 a.m., each unsuspecting, each trapped. The attacks were calculated. Bill was shot 4 to 8 times, stabbed 28 times. Lois endured 48 stab wounds, 16 to her face and neck, and a gunshot to the chest. Adam suffered 3 gunshot wounds and 11 stab wounds. Robert was stabbed 11 times, 3 wounds piercing his heart. By the time Chad left, he had stolen Robert's truck, ditched it minutes later, and disappeared into the morning. Months of investigation followed. Evidence tied Chad to the crime, his truck, clothing, weapons, shell casings, and traces of blood. He got life in prison without the possibility of parole.
April 1st, 2019 is a day that many people will never forget. It's the day that Justin Bachheim walked into work at RJR Maintenance and Management Company and found his boss, Robert Fackler, lying on the shop floor, covered in a pool of blood. It's the day that paramedics arrived at what they believed was a cardiac arrest call, only to find their victim covered in stab wounds. And it's the day that Mandan police officers arrived at that same crime scene, conducted a protective sweep of the premises, and found not 1, not even 2, but 3 additional victims. William Cobb, Lois Cobb, and Adam Fuhrer. Each one covered in gunshot wounds and stab wounds.
I'll read the jury's verdict at this time. We, the jury, duly impaneled and sworn to try the above entitled action, do find the defendant, Chad Trollin Isaak, number 1, as to the offense of murder of Lois Cobb as charged in count 1 of the information, guilty. Number 2, as to the offense of murder of William Cobb as charged in count 2 of the information, guilty. Question 3. As to the offense of murder of Adam Fuhrer, as charged in count 3 of the information, guilty. Number 4. As to the offense of murder of Robert Fackler, as charged in count 4 of the information, guilty.
The camera is grainy. The lighting is dim, but the image is unmistakable. An 11-year-old girl, blonde hair tucked behind her shoulders, walks alone across the lot of a Sarasota car wash. She doesn't know it, but someone is already watching her. From the edge of the frame, a man appears. At first he looks casual, like he's just passing by, But then, in a single calculated step, he moves directly into her path. He leans in, blocking her way. She freezes. His hand clamps around her arm. For a split second, she looks like she might pull back. She doesn't. He whispers something we can't hear, and in seconds he's steering her out of sight. She's gone. That was 6:30 p.m. on January 31st, 2004. The last known moments of Carly Bruscia. Hours later, detectives would replay that tape over and over. The image of a child being led away by a stranger would burn itself into the memory of an entire community. And for Carly's family, the nightmare had only just begun. At 6 o'clock, Carly had promised she'd be home. By 7, she was nowhere to be found. Her stepfather, Steve Kanzler, drove the same mile stretch again and again, headlights sweeping over empty sidewalks. He rolled down the window, calling her name into the night. Nothing. By the time he pulled back into the driveway, dread had already set in. Susan, Carly's mother, didn't need to hear an explanation. She felt it. Something terrible had happened. Together they went back out, retracing her route, checking side streets and wooded patches. At one point, a red tow truck crept past them. Odd. They noticed it again minutes later, parked in front of the friend's house Carly had just left. But Carly wasn't there. At 7:30 p.m, Susan's panic spilled into the phone lines. Her voice cracked as she told the 911 operator, "My daughter is missing. She's only 11. We've searched everywhere."
911, what's the location of the emergency?
My daughter is missing.
What's your address, ma'am? And your phone number? Okay. Has she been missing before?
No. She had a fight with her girlfriend and she decided to walk home. And we've been driving around for about an hour and a half. And it's now an hour and a half walk.
Within minutes, a bolo was issued. Be on the lookout for Carly Bruscia. Officers combed the area. Nothing. Neighbours joined in. Flyers were printed. The search was officially on. But while the family clung to hope, investigators were already preparing Susan for the unthinkable. Before leaving her house, they told her to call Carly's dentist. They might need dental records for identification. It was a warning no parent should ever hear. The search had barely begun when suspicion turned inward. Steve Kanzler, Carly's stepfather, was restless. He handed out flyers, desperate for leads. But one comment he made struck a nerve. At an equipment rental store, he allegedly asked if someone could get him drugs. After this whole thing blew over, the employee was stunned. A missing stepdaughter, and that's what was on his mind. He called police. Detectives brought Steve in. His answers were calm, maybe too calm. He insisted he'd been at home with Susan the entire evening. Susan backed him up. The alibi checked out. Eventually, investigators cleared him. But the doubt had already taken root. Then came another lead. The red tow truck. Steve swore he'd seen it circling near the search route. The truck belonged to Ron Choquette, a man casually dating the mother of Carly's friend. Ron admitted he was home the night Carly slept over. At one point, he was the only adult in the house. It was enough to raise eyebrows. But when detectives pressed him, Ron said he'd already left for work before Carly walked home. His co-workers confirmed it. The red truck was scratched off the list. Still, officers couldn't shake the sense that something darker was at play. Carly's friend hinted she'd been upset, maybe even reluctant to go home. Could this be a runaway case, or was it something far worse? The uncertainty weighed heavy. But the very next morning, police dogs traced Carly's scent. It ended not on her route home, but at Evie's car wash. And there, hidden on a security tape, was the proof. Carly hadn't run away. She'd been taken. The dogs had led police straight to Evie's car wash. The grainy surveillance tape did the rest. At 6:30 p.m, Carly appears on screen. Seconds later, a man steps into her path. Tattoos coil down his forearms. He's dressed in what looks like a mechanic's jumpsuit. A name tag glints on his chest, but the camera can't make it out. With one quick motion, he seizes her arm and pulls her from the frame. When Susan and Steve saw the footage, their hearts collapsed. The girl on that tape was undeniably Carly. The stranger beside her, they had never seen him before. The video hit local news stations within hours. Over and over, the public watched Carly's final moments of freedom, and then the calls came in. Hundreds of tips, hundreds of names. Most were dead ends, but a handful of callers said the same thing. That looks like Joseph Smith. Smith, 37, an auto mechanic, already had a history that read like a warning label. Drug arrests, violence against women, kidnapping, false imprisonment. He was out on parole, and one of his co-workers swore the man's mannerisms on the tape matched him exactly. Detectives now had a name, and they knew time was running out. Detectives drove to a small house in Sarasota, where Joseph Smith was renting a room from friends. As they pulled up, they spotted him outside, cigarette in hand. But when they knocked, the door stayed shut. Minutes later, his sister slipped inside, and eventually Joseph appeared, claiming he'd been asleep the whole time. The questions started fast. Where were you Sunday evening? Smith said he'd been at home, watching the Super Bowl. He insisted his friends could vouch for him. When detectives showed him the still frame from the car wash video, he didn't deny the resemblance. Looks like me, he admitted, but swore he wasn't there. Then came the request. Roll up your sleeves. The tattoos on his forearms matched perfectly. Investigators also noticed cuts and scrapes on his hands. Smith brushed them off as nothing, but his story began to fray further. He admitted he had borrowed his friend's car the night Carly vanished, a pale yellow station wagon. Surveillance showed a yellow vehicle circling the car wash minutes before the abduction. Smith said he only drove it to the marina to look at the water. His friends, however, weren't so sure. One of them later revealed the odometer had racked up more than 300 miles during that trip. And then there was his outfit. On the night Carly disappeared, Smith had left the house in a mechanic's uniform, the same kind of jumpsuit caught on the tape. Piece by piece, the walls were closing in. But Smith wasn't talking. Joseph Smith's silence didn't last. From jail, he called his brother John and confessed. He admitted taking Carly, assaulting her and choking her too hard. John led police to a wooded patch behind a church where Carly's body lay hidden, bruised and bound. Forensics confirmed the worst. Ligature strangulation, Joseph's DNA, and fibers from her clothes inside his borrowed yellow station wagon. Outrage swept the community. How had a man with 13 prior convictions, including violent offences, still been free? In 2005, Smith was convicted of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and sexual battery of a child. The judge overturned his death penalty, but he died in prison.
It was one of the most precious things to me in my life because of an animal, a disgusting, perverted animal.
On a night in 2006, a medical student walked into a bar and was never seen again. Surveillance cameras captured every person who entered and exited that night, except for him. Nearly 2 decades later, investigators still have no more answers than they did the day he vanished. Brian Schaffer was a 27-year-old med student at Ohio State who disappeared on the night of April 1st, 2006 in Columbus, Ohio. He was smart, social, and seemed to have a lot going for him. He was studying to become a doctor, dating another med student named Alexis Wagoner, and planning a spring break trip to Florida with her. Some even think he was planning to propose. But behind the scenes, things weren't totally perfect. His mum had passed away from cancer just 3 weeks earlier. His friends and family said he was devastated, but not suicidal. He threw himself into his studies and was looking forward to the vacation. His dad later mentioned how burnt out Brian seemed from school, and even questioned why he went out that night at all. Still, it was the start of spring break, so on that Friday night, Brian decided to go out. He grabbed dinner with his dad at 6 p.m, then later met up with his roommate Clint Florence to hit the campus bar scene. They started off at a place called the Ugly Tuna Saloona around 11 p.m, where Brian also called Alexis and told her, "I love you, and I'll see you in just a couple days." As the night went on, Brian, Clint, and a friend named Meredith Reed bar-hopped around the area. Everyone who saw Brian that night said he seemed in good spirits, happy, relaxed, and definitely not someone who seemed like he was in a dark place. Around 1:15 a.m, Meredith drove everyone back to the Ugly Tuna Saloona. Security cameras caught Brian and the group walking back into the bar. He looked totally normal, chatting with people while a local band played inside. At about 1:50 a.m, video shows Brian stepping outside and talking to two women near the entrance. A few minutes later, around 1:55 a.m, he turns and walks back inside the bar. And that's it. That's the last time anyone ever sees him. After that, it's like Brian vanished into thin air. Security footage from all the exits, front door, side door, shows everyone leaving the bar but not Brian. Cameras from nearby places like other bars and the theatre across the street also never picked him up. When the lights came on at closing time around 2 a.m, Brian was nowhere to be found. Clint and Meredith searched the bar, checked the bathrooms, and kept calling his phone but got no answer. Eventually, Clint figured Brian had just left on his own, maybe headed home, and they both went back thinking he was already gone. But he wasn't. By the next morning, April 2nd, people were starting to worry. Brian's girlfriend, Alexis, tried calling and texting him, but both went straight to voicemail. That wasn't like him, so she reached out to his dad, Randy. Randy drove out to Brian's apartment in Pickerington and found everything exactly how Brian had left it. His car was still in the driveway, his bed was made, his books were untouched. Nothing looked out of place, and nothing suggested he had planned to leave. Even more worrying, Brian was supposed to fly to Miami with Alexis later that same morning. When he didn't show up at the airport, it really hit everyone that something was seriously wrong. That day, his family filed a missing person report with Columbus Police. The search started right away. Police, family and friends put up posters and spread out across the Ohio State campus and surrounding neighborhoods. They searched the banks of the nearby Olentangy River, since there were rumors Brian might have somehow ended up in the water, and because a few other college-age men had drowned in local rivers in recent years. They checked creeks, drainage ditches, dumpsters, alleys, homeless shelters, hospitals, anywhere someone might have ended up. Still, there was no sign of Brian. Detectives interviewed pretty much everyone who might have seen Brian that night. His friends, Clint and Meredith, the Ugly Tuna staff, even the band that played at the bar. In total, over 100 people gave statements. Investigators carefully traced Brian's movements on surveillance footage. They saw him go into the Ugly Tuna at 1:15 a.m, and again at 1:55 a.m, after briefly stepping outside to talk to a couple of women. But after that, nothing. He was never seen leaving. The weirdest part. The building was under renovation at the time, and while most exits were covered by cameras, there was one spot that wasn't. A service exit near a freight elevator. Some think maybe Brian left through there, either by accident or on purpose. But detectives weren't convinced. They brought in cadaver dogs to search that area, including the bar's roof and other service zones, and found nothing. No trace of Brian anywhere. Police followed every lead they could. They checked Brian's phone records and credit card activity. Nothing had been used since the night he disappeared. As tips started going viral online, investigators stayed cautious. One internet theory suggested that Brian might have been a victim of the so-called smiley face killer, but there was no evidence to support it. The smiley face killer idea is basically an urban legend that popped up in the early 2000s. It came from a few retired detectives who believed a group of serial killers was targeting college-aged men, guys who were athletic, smart, and well-liked, who later turned up drowned in rivers or lakes. The killers supposedly left smiley face graffiti near where the bodies were found. It's tempting to consider that theory, basically the idea of a serial killer or killers marking their victims with smiley face graffiti. But the truth is, there's no solid evidence behind it. The FBI and other law enforcement agencies looked into it and found no real connection between the cases. Most of the deaths were ruled tragic accidents involving alcohol and water, not part of some hidden crime ring. One especially strange lead came about 6 months after Brian disappeared. Alexis, still calling his phone every night, was shocked when it actually rang instead of going straight to voicemail. The phone company traced the signal to a cell tower in Hilliard, about 14 miles from Columbus. For a moment it felt like a breakthrough, but police later said it was probably just a technical glitch. Then in 2008, 2 years after Brian went missing, tragedy struck again. His father, Randy, died in a freak storm accident. Randy was in his yard in Baltimore, Ohio, clearing debris and doing cleanup work after the storm. While doing this, a branch or heavy object blew loose and struck him, killing him instantly. At the time of his death, Randy had remained one of the most committed people in the search for Brian. He frequently posted updates, helped organise search efforts, and maintained a memorial site. His obituary even included a message hoping for Brian's return. Not long after, someone left a message on Randy's online obituary claiming to be Brian, saying he was alive and living in the US Virgin Islands. It sounded hopeful, until police traced the post to a public computer in Ohio. Just another cruel hoax. Despite the dead ends, the case has never been closed. The Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation and Columbus PD have kept it open, and in 2021 they even released an age-progressed image showing what Brian might look like today. But to this day, Brian Schaffer has never been found. As for Brian's girlfriend, Alexis was absolutely heartbroken after he disappeared. They had been planning a spring break trip together, and a lot of people thought Brian was going to propose during that vacation. In the months that followed, she stayed really involved in the search, kept in touch with his family, and even called his phone every night, just hoping for some kind of miracle. But as time went on and no real answers came, Alexis slowly stepped away from the spotlight and decided to move forward with her life. She eventually got married and had kids, starting a whole new chapter. If you look at footage of this girl and I ask you to guess what crime she committed, without knowing the context, judging by her reactions, you might say speeding or driving under the influence. And you wouldn't be entirely wrong. But on top of those charges, she's also facing 4 counts of felonious assault and 4 counts of murder for killing her boyfriend and friend. After her sentence was read, though, her confidence and smiles turned into tears. It was just after sunrise on July 31st, 2022, when a 2018 Toyota Camry roared into the quiet streets of Strongsville, Ohio. 17-year-old Mackenzie Sherilla was behind the wheel. Her 20-year-old boyfriend Dominic Russo and his friend Davian Flanagan crammed into the back seat. A few heartbeats later, the Camry slammed into the brick wall of a business at the corner of Progress Drive and Alameda Drive. Witnesses described the crash as cataclysmic. By the time police arrived, Dominic and Davian were dead, and Mackenzie was trapped in the mangled wreck, unconscious, bleeding and badly hurt. What began as an ordinary summer morning was about to become the centre of a nationwide true crime drama. To understand that morning, we have to rewind to the months before. Mackenzie Sherilla was a high school senior from nearby Strongsville. Dominic Russo was a few years older, a recent grad who ran a small clothing business and doted on his nieces and nephews. The two had met as teenagers and dated off and on for 4 years, even moving in together by late 2021. By the middle of 2022, things between Mackenzie and Dominic had gotten rocky. Dominic's mum, Christine Russo, told investigators the relationship had been strained for months. Constant breakups and makeups, heated arguments, even threats. Christine still thought of Mackenzie like family, but she couldn't ignore how Mackenzie was getting more possessive. Behind closed doors, the little blow-ups were happening more often, and friends were starting to worry. One night in July confirmed their worst fears. Sometime mid-month, Dominic called his mum in secret saying he was in a bad situation with Mackenzie. A family friend, Christopher Martin, jumped in his car to help. He ended up following Dominic's Jeep as it drove next to Mackenzie's Camry on the interstate. Over the phone, Martin could hear Dominic yelling at Mackenzie, and through their open windows he heard Mackenzie screaming, "I'm going to wreck this car right now!" When the cars finally pulled over, Mackenzie was flailing her arms and shouting. Dominic scrambled out of her car, shaken, while Mackenzie kept swinging her hands at him. Dominic jumped into Martin's car and they sped off, leaving her alone in the Camry. By the time they got to the Russo house, Dominic was pale and trembling. Looking back, the warning signs were all there. No police reports came out of that highway scare, but Dominic's family never forgot it. Then, just days before the crash, something else came up. Investigators later found videos on a friend's phone, hidden in Dominic's house, showing Mackenzie screaming at him after that fight. In the grainy clips, she's swearing, threatening him, and even promising to break into his house. Those videos only surfaced after Dominic's death, and they showed just how bad things had gotten. Still, on the surface, life went on. The night of the crash started like any other. On July 30th, 2022, Mackenzie, Dominic and Davian went out with friends. They made a quick stop at a backyard graduation party around 10:15 p.m, but left after a few minutes. An hour later, they headed to the house of 19-year-old Paul Burlinghouse, a friend from school. Paul later told the court the vibe was pretty chill, like just a normal sleepover. They listened to music, some of the older kids smoked a little weed, but there was no drinking and no fighting. Paul said Mackenzie and Dominic seemed fine. After midnight, everyone settled in. Mackenzie on one couch, Davian on another. Dominic was lying down too, but by 4 a.m, when Paul drifted back to sleep, Mackenzie and Dominic had quietly slipped out. By 5:30 a.m, Mackenzie was behind the wheel of her Camry, Dominic and Davian riding along. They cruised down Progress Drive, a sleepy 35-mile-per-hour road, laughing and joking at first. But then Mackenzie floored it. The Camry shot from around 40 miles per hour to almost 100. Without warning, it jumped the curb and slammed straight into a brick wall. 20 seconds later, 2 lives were gone. Officer Michael Galassi, first on the scene, said it looked like the car had been cut in half. The front end crushed into the wall, glass and metal everywhere. He saw Mackenzie pinned against the seat, her lower body trapped beneath the dashboard, airbags blown. It was a scene no one there would ever forget. In the front passenger seat was 19-year-old Davian Flanagan. He was slumped back, head tilted upward, not breathing, the kind of stillness that told you right away something was very wrong. His injuries were bad, especially the trauma to his head. Behind him, Dominic Russo was pinned under the reclined seatback. His body crumpled in a way that made Officer Galassi's stomach drop. For a moment, Galassi thought all 3 were gone. The car looked so destroyed it felt like a miracle anyone could still be alive. He called for medics, and within minutes firefighters were on scene with the jaws of life. They smashed windows, sliced through mangled metal, and tried to make space to reach whoever was left inside. At first there was only silence. Then, buried under the deployed airbags, came the faintest sound. Mumbling. It was Mackenzie Sharilla, the teenage driver. She was still alive. They got her out and laid her on a stretcher beside Davian. By now she was groaning, barely conscious, but still able to whisper one thing. "How is Davian?" The answer wasn't good. He was technically still alive, and they rushed to get him onto an air ambulance, but he didn't make it to the hospital. Dominic's fate was decided right there at the scene. Medics said there was nothing they could do. Mackenzie was airlifted to a trauma centre with serious injuries to her leg and arm. She'd need surgery, but she was breathing. A blood test later showed she hadn't been drinking. She was awake enough to answer questions, but said she couldn't remember anything about the crash. By the time the sun was up, word had already spread through Strongsville. 2 young men were gone, and it wasn't because of some random tragic accident. The whole community was left stunned and heartbroken. In the days after the crash, detectives interviewed friends and family, collected debris, and pulled the Camry's black box. Inside the car, they also found a digital scale, 2 phones, and a bag under the driver's seat holding 8.1 grams of mushrooms plus some cannabis. Mackenzie denied using drugs, and her blood test showed only trace THC, no alcohol. But the stash became part of the case. The black box data told the real story. For the 4.6 seconds before impact, the accelerator was pressed to the floor. No brakes, no swerves. The car fishtailed, then made a sharp right into the wall. Mechanics confirmed there was no malfunction. The Camry worked fine. A month later, Mackenzie was charged with 2 counts of aggravated murder and other offences. At trial, prosecutors said she chose a deserted route and aimed at the building. The crash video, called Chilling and Tragic by Judge Nancy Russo, showed the car accelerating straight in. The defence claimed she might have fainted or had a seizure, but the judge wasn't convinced. On August 14, 2023, Mackenzie was found guilty on all counts. This was not reckless driving. This was murder, Russo said, sentencing her to 2 concurrent life terms with parole possible after 15 years. The screen flickered to life. "Hey everyone, we're live!" A man in a Santa hat grinned at his camera, controller in hand, ready to stream hours of Grand Theft Auto, Vice City. It was December 18th, 2022, 1 week before Christmas, and dozens of subscribers tuned in to watch him play. To anyone watching, he was safe at home, joking about his sound levels, sipping soda, and blasting digital criminals across neon streets. But outside of YouTube, in the real world, something very different was happening. While the stream rolled on, while viewers dropped comments he couldn't see, the man on the screen was nowhere near his computer. The broadcast wasn't live. It had been recorded days earlier, set to play automatically, a perfect alibi. Because at that very same moment, in a quiet house in Silverwood Green, a young woman was fighting for her life. Neighbours later recalled hearing a scream at around 9 p.m. Police cameras caught the silhouette of a man entering the neighbourhood, heading directly to her home, as if he already knew where to go. Her name was Natalie McNally. She was 32 years old, 15 weeks pregnant, and that night she was ambushed in her own home, stabbed repeatedly, beaten, strangled. Defensive wounds showed she fought back with everything she had. All the while, the livestream kept running. His voice filled the internet, cheerful and calm as though nothing was wrong, a digital smokescreen for the horror unfolding in the real world, and chillingly, midway through the stream, a message flashed across the screen. No time to die. 3 hours into the live broadcast, the exact moment Natalie was attacked. This was no accident. This was planned. Morning light crept over Lurgan, a small town in Northern Ireland. It was Monday, December 19th. For most people, it was just another work day, but for Natalie McNally's friends and family, something felt immediately wrong. Natalie wasn't answering her phone. She didn't show up for work. No texts, no calls. Silence. This wasn't like her. Not now. Not when she was 15 weeks pregnant with her first child. By evening, worry had turned into panic. That night, her boyfriend, Stephen McCullough, drove the 20 minutes from his home in Lisbon to check on her. At around 10 p.m, he stepped into her house in Silverwood Green. The scene inside was every family's nightmare. Natalie was dead. She had been brutally attacked, stabbed multiple times, strangled, beaten. There were defensive wounds on her arms, proof she had fought to survive. Her unborn son was gone too. Police swarmed the house. The post-mortem confirmed it. Natalie had been murdered the night before, on Sunday, December 18th. The holidays were supposed to be a time of warmth and family. Instead, Lurgan was plunged into grief. And as detectives began piecing together the timeline, one fact became horrifyingly clear. Whoever killed Natalie had known exactly where she lived. This wasn't random. Natalie was 32 years old, born and raised in Lurgan, a town of 30,000 in County Armagh. She studied law at Queen's University Belfast before shifting paths into marketing and management. Clever, ambitious, determined. By 2022, she was working for TransLink, Northern Ireland's public transport company, running campaigns and shaping messages that reached thousands of commuters every day. But her real passions lay outside the office. Natalie loved animals, puzzles and football. Everton on the English side, Armagh in Gaelic. She threw herself into causes too, especially equality, becoming a familiar voice at local campaigns. And then there was family. Always family. Christmas was her season, the time to gather, laugh, exchange gifts, argue about football and fall asleep full of food. That December was even more special. Natalie had been keeping a secret, a quiet joy she planned to share with everyone on Christmas Day. She was pregnant, a baby boy. Her parents already knew. They were overjoyed, counting down the days until she would make the big announcement to the rest of her family and friends. That Christmas dinner would have been unforgettable, the kind people talk about for years, the one where everything changes, but it never came. Because on the night of December 18th, Natalie never made it past her front door alive. Her dreams, her child, her family's future, stolen. And as detectives started combing through evidence, they realized this wasn't just a brutal murder. It was personal. While Natalie's family mourned, another name began surfacing in whispers and police files. Stephen. To the outside world, he was an entertainer, a YouTuber with more than 40,000 subscribers, a man obsessed with pop culture. His channel was a mix of toy reviews, Doctor Who commentary, Star Wars collectibles and podcasts. The kind of guy who could spend hours arguing about lightsabers and action figures. He even worked part-time for the Belfast Telegraph, presenting himself as a voice talent. But beneath the persona, there was something else. Stephen lived just 20 minutes away in Lisbon. He and Natalie had been dating only a few months since August. By December, she was already pregnant with his child. To family and friends, the relationship seemed sudden, maybe even rushed. But no one could have predicted the darkness lurking behind his smiling live streams. Because while his subscribers knew him as a man who could chat endlessly about sci-fi, police were beginning to see something very different. A man with motive, opportunity, and the coldness to build a murder alibi in advance. Stephen wasn't just another boyfriend. He wasn't just another YouTuber. He was about to become the prime suspect in one of Northern Ireland's most chilling Christmas murders. At first, the evidence didn't point anywhere. A young woman murdered in her own home, a boyfriend with a clean alibi. It should have been open and shut, but detectives knew better. They pulled CCTV from Silverwood Green, Natalie's neighbourhood. It was a quiet cul-de-sac. One road in, one road out. On the night of December 18th, cameras caught a man walking into the estate at 8:52 p.m. He headed straight for Natalie's house, as if he already knew the address. 38 minutes later, at 9:30 p.m, the same figure walked out again. Around that exact time, neighbours reported hearing screams. Stephen leaned on his YouTube channel as a shield. He told police he couldn't possibly be the killer. He'd been streaming for hours that very night. But little details didn't sit right. During the live broadcast, Stephen never responded to comments in real time. He brushed it off. The streaming software's kind of messed up. I can't see the chat. Odd. Even odder was a sudden image that popped up midway through the 6-hour stream. No time to die. The timing was chilling. That screen appeared 3 hours into the video, the exact window when police believed Natalie was attacked. It wasn't proof, not yet. But it was enough to raise eyebrows, because what looked like a solid alibi was starting to look more like a carefully crafted cover. Digital forensics stepped in. Experts traced the stream back and discovered something chilling. It wasn't live. It had been recorded 4 days earlier, on December 14th, then scheduled to play on the 18th. On January 31st, police arrested him. The theory, rage, betrayal, and a refusal to face fatherhood pushed him over the edge. He has not yet been convicted. On a cold November evening in 2009, the quiet Utah town of Payson was about to become the center of a storm that no one saw coming. Inside his secluded home sat Kay Mortensen, a 70-year-old retired BYU engineering professor. To neighbors, Kay was the kind of man who had lived a full life of work, church, and family. A man who guarded his property almost like a watchdog, protective of his space and deeply private. But that night, all of that changed. Police received a frantic 911 call. On the other end of the line was Pamela Mortensen, Kay's daughter-in-law, her voice unsteady, reporting that Kay had been attacked. Her husband, Roger, Kay's own son, could be heard in the background. When officers arrived, they found Kay in his bathroom, his throat brutally slashed. It was a scene of pure horror. Blood pooled across the tile floor, signs of a struggle scattered throughout. At first glance, this didn't look like some random home invasion. Whoever had carried out the attack moved through Kay's home with purpose. There were no signs of forced entry, and Kay's fierce protectiveness of his property made it unlikely he would have simply let strangers inside. No, this seemed personal, and immediately suspicion began to shift toward the people who had discovered the body, Roger and Pam. The couple's stories wavered. Little inconsistencies crept into their retellings of the night. Roger claimed he'd gone upstairs, then returned to find his wife on the phone with 911. He remembered declaring, almost flatly, "He's dead." For detectives listening closely, that lack of emotion raised red flags. Then came the polygraphs. Both Roger and Pam were tested, and both were flagged as deceptive. Of course, polygraphs aren't exactly science. They don't prove guilt, but they do crank up the pressure. And in this case, they pushed the spotlight even harder on the grieving son and his wife. Investigators dug deeper. In Roger and Pam's home, stacks of unpaid bills turned up. Debt was piling on them. And Kay Mortensen wasn't just a retired professor, he was wealthy. He had millions, and Roger stood to inherit a share of it. Suddenly the police had a working theory: financial motive. The media picked it up fast. Headlines painted Roger and Pam as the prime suspects in a shocking patricide. Their faces appeared on TV, their names whispered across Utah County. The narrative was building: a son, desperate for money, killing his father for inheritance. Roger and Pam fought back. They hired lawyers. They insisted they were innocent. Pam, in fact, was even offered a deal: testify against her husband, and she could save herself. She refused. Her confidence in their innocence was absolute, but none of it seemed to matter. By July 2010, a grand jury was convened. Evidence was presented and the decision was made. Roger and Pam Mortensen would stand trial for the murder of Kay Mortensen. For the prosecution, it looked airtight. There was no evidence that anyone else had been inside that home. All signs pointed back to Roger and Pam, and yet, beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to show. In the weeks after Kay Mortensen's brutal death, suspicion began to turn inward, toward his own family. The inconsistencies in Roger and Pamela's statements were piling up. Detectives noticed how their 911 call didn't quite match the crime scene, how their stories seemed rehearsed yet clumsy.
Okay. Sorry, you don't believe. But I'm trying to. Does it sound too rehearsed? Or. Yeah. Okay.
Is your husband capable of killing somebody?
I need to get a drink.
I wouldn't hope. I mean, I wouldn't think he is. I wouldn't think that he's capable of killing.
Right here, she either knocked on the door or rang the doorbell. I believe she knocked on the door.
I had this door opened because I knocked on the wooden door. I didn't ring the doorbell. And I said, "Is Kay here?" They proceeded to say he is and said he was upstairs, and they let us in.
The other guy shut the door. I turned around and looked. Somebody was walking down the stairs with a gun in their hand. He pointed at us and said, "You're here at the wrong time. Put out your hand." I cut my wire tie, and I cut my wife's wire tie. I said, "Stay here, I'll see if their car is gone." And I got up, and I walked up these steps. I looked out the window to where the vehicle was parked, and it was now gone. I came back downstairs, and my wife was talking at the time to 911 dispatch. And I said, my wife was talking at the time to 911 dispatch. And I said, 911 dispatch.
And how every retelling shifted slightly, like they were grasping for the right version. Roger and Pam tried to defend themselves. They pointed to the bills scattered around the house, the debts that Kay had left behind, insisting that money was not their motive. But investigators weren't convinced. On paper, the picture was damning. Kay was worth millions, Roger stood to inherit a share, and the house had been secured like a fortress, almost impossible for strangers to break into without knowing the layout. By July 2010, the pressure boiled over. A grand jury reviewed the evidence, heard the inconsistencies, and decided Roger and Pam should be charged. Just like that, they were indicted for the murder of Kay Mortensen. The headline screamed betrayal: son and daughter-in-law accused of slaughtering the family patriarch. Roger and Pam maintained their innocence, of course. Still, the walls were closing in. The prosecution was building a narrative, and the couple's chances of walking free seemed slimmer by the day. What nobody knew then was that the real killers were still out there, hiding in plain sight. The case against Roger and Pam seemed airtight, until a single phone call shattered everything. Rachel, the ex-wife of a man named Martin Bond, came forward with a chilling confession. Martin and his friend Benjamin Reddick had told her they were the real killers. Unlike Roger and Pam, Martin had a direct tie to Kay Mortensen. Kay had known him since he was a boy, trusted him enough to open his door without hesitation. That trust became fatal. Once inside, Martin and Ben pulled weapons, zip-tied Kay, and demanded his prized gun collection. Kay, clever as ever, tried to mislead them by showing off a stash of cheaper firearms in his basement bunker, but the trick only sealed his fate. Dragged upstairs, he was killed with a butcher knife taken from his own kitchen, his throat slit in a brutal, calculated act. Rachel revealed that the men had rehearsed cover stories and threatened her into silence, but after seeing Roger and Pam wrongly accused, she broke. Her conscience wouldn't allow it. Armed with her tip, police dug into Martin and Ben's lives and quickly found the cracks. Stolen guns surfacing near Vernal, lies unravelling under questioning, and eventually both men turning on each other, each insisting the other delivered the fatal blow.
Absolutely, 100% it was Ben.
Who cut his throat? It's Marty. Who cut his throat? It's Marty. Who cut it? It's Marty. Who? Marty. Marty who? I swear to God, Marty Bond.
It was the turning point investigators had desperately needed. After months of chasing the wrong suspects, they finally had the truth. With Rachel's testimony, the case flipped. Roger and Pam, who had spent 5 months in jail and nearly went to trial for murder, were cleared and released, though the damage to their lives and reputations lingered.
To humiliate me, they did. It was terrible.
Yeah. He and his wife were wrongly accused of killing his father. Today, Roger and Pamela Mortensen broke their silence about their ordeal of being arrested and intimidated by police when they were, in fact, themselves victims of a heinous crime.
We were falsely incarcerated, and that we aren't the people that we were made out to be.
They were at a loss as to what to do, and it was easier for them to blame us than to actually spend the time to look at who could be guilty.
Investigators now zeroed in on Martin Bond and Benjamin Redig. The men denied responsibility at first, but evidence betrayed them. Kay's missing guns were recovered from Bond's house and buried in nearby fields, and both men admitted being present during the murder, while blaming each other for the killing blow. Redig eventually took a plea deal, accepting guilt for aggravated murder and kidnapping, and was sentenced to 25 years to life. Bond went to trial, maintaining innocence, but the jury didn't buy it. He was convicted of aggravated murder and handed life without parole. For Kay's family, the verdicts brought closure but also bitterness. Roger and Pam had been wrongly accused, humiliated, and treated as killers before the truth came out. In the end, Kay Mortensen's life was taken not by mysterious intruders or a family plot, but by two opportunists he trusted enough to let inside, men who valued his gun collection more than his humanity. The men thought it was just another ordinary job, a simple kitchen renovation in a modest house in Barangay Luke, Danau City. Sledgehammers cracked against the floor tiles, dust clouded the air, and the sound of concrete giving way echoed through the room. But then, a stench began to seep upward. At first, the crew brushed it off. Old pipes, rotting garbage, maybe a dead rat in the walls. But this wasn't the smell of decay they knew. This was heavier, thicker, the kind of odour that clung to the back of your throat and made your stomach lurch. One worker gagged and covered his nose with his shirt. Another cursed under his breath. Still, they pressed on, their shovels scraping deeper into the ground. That's when the first strange object surfaced. A battered, half-rotted passport. The face staring up at them was a woman's. Her name, Evelyn Sios. The crew exchanged uneasy looks. Why would a passport be buried under a kitchen floor? They kept digging, hearts racing now, as the smell grew unbearable. Beneath the churned-up concrete, they struck a cement-sealed septic tank. Someone had gone to great lengths to lock it up tight. When the seal finally broke, the truth came spilling out. The sour stench engulfed the room like poison gas. And inside that dark, suffocating space lay what no one could mistake. The skeletal remains of a woman, wrapped in rags, rotting in silence for years. The house wasn't just a home, it was a tomb. 4 years before that grim discovery, Evelyn Sios simply vanished. It was 2016, and to anyone looking from the outside, it seemed sudden, almost suspiciously neat. Her daughter Joanna was quick with the explanation. She left for Singapore. She wanted to work abroad. Fresh start. At first, people believed her. After all, many in the Philippines left to work overseas. But something didn't sit right. Friends noticed Evelyn never reached out. No calls, no emails, no photos of her new life. For a woman who had always been present, checking in on her neighbours, chatting with friends and doting on her children, silence felt unnatural. Then came the Facebook posts. Updates popped up on Evelyn's account, but they were odd. The words didn't sound like her. Messages to friends were short, robotic, almost like someone wearing her identity as a mask. And when people asked when she might visit, there was always an excuse, always a delay. Her son, John, grew restless. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He filed missing person reports, desperate for police to take him seriously. But with the Facebook activity still trickling in, authorities brushed him off. She's alive. She's just away. Don't worry. But behind closed doors, inside that same house where Evelyn was said to have left, life went on, unnervingly normal. Joanna stayed put, raising her own child with her boyfriend Ronald. To outsiders, it seemed like a family adjusting, but in truth, the matriarch who held that family together had simply disappeared, and no one could explain why. What nobody knew then was that Evelyn hadn't left at all. She was still inside that house, silent, waiting to be found. To understand what happened to Evelyn, you have to step back and look at her life before 2016. She wasn't just a name on a passport. She was a widow, a mother trying to raise 2 children on her own, Joanna and John. Life was not easy, but Evelyn carried herself with quiet strength, working hard, doing everything she could to keep her small family afloat. But inside the house, the cracks were already forming. Joanna, the younger of the 2, grew restless, rebellious. By her late teens, she was already clashing with her mother at every turn. Evelyn wanted discipline, responsibility, but Joanna wanted freedom, independence, and often resented being told what to do. Then came the pregnancy. Joanna found herself with Ronald, a boyfriend her mother never fully trusted. Suddenly, the household dynamic shifted. The fights between mother and daughter grew louder, sharper. Evelyn feared Joanna was drifting into a life she couldn't control, while Joanna saw her mother as an obstacle, someone standing in the way of the life she wanted. John, meanwhile, felt the tension but was powerless to stop it. He could see his mother's frustration, the exhaustion in her face, the way arguments with Joanna left her drained. The house became less of a home and more of a battlefield, each day filled with bitter words, slammed doors, and a sense that something was building, something dangerous. Evelyn had always been the glue that held her family together, but as the bond between her and Joanna frayed, that glue began to crack, and once it did, there would be no putting it back. Because in that house, resentment wasn't just simmering, it was waiting, like a fuse creeping toward the explosion. After Evelyn's sudden disappearance, the house grew quiet, but it wasn't the kind of quiet that comes from peace. It was the quiet of secrets. For the next 2 years, Joanna and Ronald built their lives directly above Evelyn's hidden grave. To keep suspicion away, Joanna became her mother online. She typed out lifeless Facebook messages, posted half-hearted updates, and told friends Evelyn was working abroad. Every excuse was carefully rehearsed. She's busy, she can't come home yet, she's saving money. But lies always leave cracks. Neighbours whispered about the foul smells that drifted from the kitchen, odours that came and went. When the cement over the septic tank began to fracture, Ronald patched it up. He mixed fresh concrete, sealing it again like someone covering up a wound. John, however, couldn't rest. His gut told him Evelyn hadn't just walked away. He filed missing person reports, pleaded with the police, begged them to look deeper, but each time he hit the same wall. Your mother is still posting online. She's alive. As long as that account remained active, nobody wanted to listen. Meanwhile, inside the house, Joanna raised her baby as if nothing had happened. Family meals were cooked, birthdays passed, and life went on. All while Evelyn's body lay just a few feet beneath their feet. It was a cover-up held together by silence, cement, and the cold determination of a daughter who refused to let the truth slip. And for years, it worked, until the day the workers' shovels broke through the floor. When police arrived at the Seos home in 2020, there was no denying what they had found. The remains in the septic tank were Evelyn's, and suddenly, all those excuses, all those Facebook posts, all those years of silence collapsed under the weight of the truth. Joanna and Ronald were taken in for questioning. At first they tried to dodge, to deflect, but the evidence was too strong, and the smell of guilt had been festering for years. Cornered, Joanna finally broke. What came out of her mouth chilled investigators to the bone. She admitted she and Ronald had plotted against her mother. Evelyn had become too controlling, too overbearing, and in Joanna's eyes there was no escape but one. She confessed that on that night in 2016, she had lured her mother into the basement. Ronald was waiting, with a hammer in his hand. The first blow stunned Evelyn, dropping her to the floor. But it didn't end there. Joanna, her own daughter, picked up a knife. Together they turned the basement into a slaughterhouse. Evelyn never stood a chance. Afterward they faced the problem of the body. Ronald and Joanna dragged Evelyn's lifeless form into the septic tank beneath the kitchen. They sealed it shut with cement, covering their crime with a layer of stone. And then they went upstairs, back to their lives, as if nothing had happened. Listening to Joanna's confession, detectives could hardly process the coldness in her voice. This wasn't a moment of weakness. It wasn't a sudden accident. It was deliberate, calculated. A mother, murdered by the very daughter she had raised. The truth was out, but the horror of it was just beginning to sink in. For the next 4 years, life in the CEO's household carried on in a way that almost defied belief. A family raising a baby, cooking meals, and sleeping soundly just a few feet above the rotting remains of their own mother. Neighbours dropped by, friends came and went, but no one suspected the kitchen floor was hiding a tomb. Joanna kept Evelyn alive online, typing hollow messages, while Ronald quietly maintained the cement that sealed their secret. It was only when construction crews cracked the floor that the facade finally crumbled, and with it came the disturbing realization that everyone who had stepped inside the house had been dining, laughing, and living above death itself. When the arrests came, the community reeled. A daughter and her boyfriend accused of something unthinkable, the betrayal of a parent in the most brutal way possible. But justice was strangely unsatisfying. Though Joanna and Ronald faced charges, the details of their sentencing faded into silence, leaving unanswered questions and a public still hungry for closure.
He's one of the most dangerous men I have ever come across. I have absolutely no doubt in my mind, had he not been caught, he would have gone on to kill further people.
Easter Sunday, 2023. Instead of laughter, hymns, and the smell of roast lamb, Mercy Island woke to something darker. Ellie Baxter pushed open the gate to her parents' home. The blinds were still drawn. 2 days had passed without a single call, not even a holiday greeting. That wasn't like her mother. That wasn't like her father. She walked around to the back, peering through the conservatory glass, and then she froze. Stephen and Carol Baxter sat side by side in their armchairs, motionless, heads slumped, eyes closed, the kind of stillness you don't mistake for sleep. Panic surged. Ellie grabbed her phone. First, she dialed Luke DeWitt, the family friend who lived only streets away. Then, trembling, she called 999. Within minutes, Luke came running. He pressed the phone to his ear, trying to explain to the dispatcher what they were seeing. His voice wavered. They're not moving. They've been like this for at least a day and a half.
I'm the friend. They're just
Right, okay. Right, are you with the patient now?
They are there.
Right, okay.
They're like, they're sick.
You're saying there, so just to confirm, how many people are hurt?
Sorry, I can't hear you. Well,
how many people require help, just to confirm?
2. I have 2. Right. I need to come outside. It's their daughter you can hear. Yeah, that's absolutely fine. So I'm all going to help you now. Just stay on the phone with me. Just tell me exactly what happened from what you know, please, just so we can all go to bed safe. Well, we just turned up to the house, and we hadn't really heard from anyone for about a day and a half. So we came round, and their daughter got here first, and I think they got round to the back, saw through their conservatory that they were sitting in their armchairs, not moving.
Paramedics smashed a window to get inside. Cold bodies. No pulse, no blood, no forced entry, no obvious cause. Just 2 lives ended neatly in silence. Something about the scene was wrong. Very wrong. Mercy Island didn't look like the kind of place where evil lurked. A small coastal community, only 9 miles from Colchester, its beaches had been praised as some of the best in the United Kingdom. Generations lived and died here, attending the same schools, raising families, joining the yacht club. Stephen and Carol Baxter were among them. Successful, respected. Carol ran Sea Splash, a bathroom accessories business best known for its curved bath mats. Stephen, her husband of more than 2 decades, worked as a global lead for operational risk at a major real estate firm. Their home, worth over £1 million, sat on a quiet street in West Marseille. They should have been enjoying their retirement years, travelling, spending time with their grandchildren, celebrating holidays like Easter with family. But inside that conservatory, the image told a different story. No struggle, no sign of violence, no clue as to why. The community whispered. Had it been an accident, a carbon monoxide leak, or something far more sinister? Carol Baxter's health had been faltering for years. She was only in her 60s, but fatigue clung to her like a shadow. Doctors diagnosed Hashimoto's disease, an autoimmune disorder that attacks the thyroid gland. It left her forgetful, scattered, sometimes behaving as if she were years older than she was. Her daughter Ellie remembered silly mistakes, moments when Carol seemed lost in her own home. Concern turned into desperation. Carol would try anything to get better. Across the Atlantic in Florida, a supposed endocrinologist named Dr. Andrea Bowden prescribed herbal remedies, strange potions meant to rebalance her thyroid. Bowden sent instructions through emails. Carol trusted them. Too much. And always, there was Luke DeWitt, the helpful family friend. He'd arrive with smoothies, herbal concoctions, energy bombs meant to perk Carol up. He filmed her symptoms, sending videos overseas for Bowden to assess. Carol even reassured the doctor in one message, "Luke always makes all of your potions." But despite the remedies, Carol wasn't improving. In February 2022, a hospital discovered a 177mm tack lodged in her digestive system. No one could explain how it got there. Something, or someone, was poisoning her life. Luke DeWitt was 33, a computer science graduate who had lived on Mercy Island all his life. To most, he seemed harmless. Odd, yes. Shy. Nerdy. But kind. He volunteered at a soup kitchen, helped with the town carnival, spent evenings gaming or attending Comic-Con. To the Baxters, Luke was almost family. A decade earlier, he had redesigned their company's website. From there, he slipped deeper into their lives, sorting Carol's medications, joining her at the gym, sharing cups of tea, encouraging her when illness wore her down. Neighbours thought it was touching. Here was a young man, still living with his mother, caring for an older couple as if they were his own. The Baxters' children noticed his constant presence but brushed it off. Their parents pitied Luke. He was lonely. He was nerdy weird. He needed company. What no one knew then was that Luke's help came with strings, invisible ones. Strings he was quietly tightening. Because Luke wasn't just a helper, he was watching, recording, and planning. At first, detectives suspected a silent killer. Carbon monoxide. The windows were thrown open, the house aired out, but monitors revealed nothing. No gas leak, no accident. Then came the toxicology results, and with them, horror. Both Stephen and Carol Baxter had consumed lethal doses of fentanyl. In the United States, fentanyl fueled an epidemic. But in the UK, it was rare, a drug reserved only for terminal patients in extreme pain. Carol wasn't prescribed it. Stephen wasn't prescribed it. So how had it entered their bodies? Pathologists found more. Carol's system contained dangerously high levels of promethazine, an over-the-counter sedative. The combination of the two drugs wasn't an accident. It was a cocktail designed to kill. The Essex police officially opened a murder investigation, And in the quiet streets of West Marseille, a chilling question spread. Who would want the Baxters dead? The first cracks appeared in the family's grief when they went through the house. Hidden among the Baxters' belongings was a short 5-part will. Not the official document filed with their solicitors, a new one. This will left control of Sea Splash, their thriving bath mat business, not to their children, but to Luke DeWitt. Even stranger, detectives learned that less than an hour after Luke had last been seen with the couple, a transfer of £6,000 had been made into the company account. The signature on it? Stephen Baxter's. But investigators weren't convinced Stephen ever touched it. The picture was getting darker. Luke, the ever-helpful friend, the one comforting the daughter at the scene, had stood to gain control of the business. He had access to the house. He had been the last to see them alive. And now he had a motive. By July 2023, detectives had enough. The will was fake, the money transfer suspicious, and fentanyl patches had been traced back to Luke's late father, prescribed during his cancer treatment. When police searched Luke's bedroom, they found opened capsules, leftover patches, and even a box of tacks, just like the one once discovered in Carol's body. The quiet neighbour wasn't a helper, he was a predator. On a warm summer morning, Essex police knocked on Luke DeWitt's door. The officer's words cut through the silence. Luke, you're under arrest on suspicion of murder.
The reason we're here today, mate, is I'm going to have to arrest you, mate, alright? And that's on suspicion of murder. Alright, as part of a police investigation, you've been identified as being a suspect in relation to the deaths of Caroline and Stephen Baxter, 27th and 9th of April, 2023, alright? Okay. So it means you don't have to say anything, but may harm your defence if you do not mention any questions, something you may later on in court. Anything you do say may be evidence. So we'll be taking you up to Chelmsford custody, and then there'll be a process from there, mate, alright?
He was sentenced to life. April 25th, 2005. The morning rush in Amagasaki, Japan was alive with its usual rhythm. Commuters pouring into stations, trains sliding in and out with clockwork precision. Among them was train 5418M, a 7-car commuter service on the Fukuchiyama line, leaving Takarazuka station at 9:03 a.m. It was late. Not by much, just 15 seconds. But in Japan's world-renowned rail system, where seconds matter, even this was already a blemish. The man at the controls was 23-year-old Ryujiro Takami, a young driver with only a year of experience on the line. Earlier that morning, he had committed a small but costly mistake, passing a red signal at low speed, forcing the train's automatic brakes to slam on and bring everything to a halt. That error had pushed him behind schedule, and Takami now carried the weight of that failure as he pressed forward. Every decision he made from here on would be shaped by the company culture he worked under, a culture that demanded perfection and punished mistakes with humiliation. As the train sped on, the delay grew worse. Ikeda station was overcrowded, and the rush of passengers took longer than expected to board. By the time the doors closed, Takami was nearly a full minute late. For most of the world's railway systems, a 60-second delay is meaningless. But in JR West, this was unacceptable. Every second mattered. Takami, rattled and desperate, pushed the train harder. He was chasing time, trying to claw back those lost seconds, even as alarms in his cab warned him of excessive speed. The line between discipline and disaster was already beginning to blur, and Takami was about to cross it. Japan's rail system is famous worldwide for its precision. A train being late by even a minute is rare, and delays are usually measured in seconds. To outsiders, this punctuality might seem almost obsessive, but in Japan it was considered a matter of national pride. The West Japan Rail Company, or JR West, had inherited this culture after the breakup of Japan's state-owned rail system. Their trains were expected to arrive on the dot, no excuses. On busy commuter lines like the Fukuchiyama line, even the smallest slip could ripple across the schedule, affecting thousands of passengers. This strict environment bred immense pressure on drivers. At JR West, being late by more than 30 seconds wasn't just a mark against you, it could mean punishment. Drivers who overshot platforms or caused delays risked being pulled off their trains and sent to what the company called day shift education. On paper, this sounded like retraining. In reality, it was closer to humiliation. Employees would be forced to spend days or even weeks cutting grass, pulling weeds, cleaning toilets, or copying company policies by hand. They might face verbal abuse from supervisors, be docked pay, and worst of all, never know when they'd be allowed back on duty. For young drivers like 23-year-old Rujiro Takami, the fear of being disciplined was ever present. He had already been through the process once before. To be sent back again would not only be embarrassing, but also damaging to his career. This fear loomed large over every decision he made that morning. What might have been a simple mistake in any other country, a late departure, a minor overshoot, was, in J.R. West's world, a potential career disaster. And Takami knew it. By the time train 5418M reached Itami Station, driver Takami was already rattled. He had overshot the platform by the length of 3 carriages, a blunder that had to be reported. Embarrassed and panicked, he called the conductor at the rear of the train, suggesting that they downplay the mistake and say it was only 1 carriage. The conductor refused, bluntly telling him he was driving too fast. For Takami, the humiliation of another reprimand loomed large. Determined to claw back lost time, he pushed the train harder than ever. As the train raced toward Amagasaki, it hit 116 kilometers per hour, dangerously high for the tight curve just before the station. Takami must have realized the danger because he briefly applied the service brake. But he didn't dare pull the emergency brake. Doing so would require a formal explanation to his superiors, an admission that he had been speeding, and likely another round of day shift education. In the split second when decisive action might have saved lives, fear of punishment held him back. At 9:18 a.m, the train entered the curve. The front 2 cars slammed off the tracks and ploughed directly into a nearby apartment building. The force crushed the lead cars beyond recognition, killing everyone inside, including Takami. The remaining 5 cars twisted and piled into each other, leaving hundreds of passengers trapped, injured, and screaming for help. What should have been a routine Monday morning commute had, in seconds, turned into Japan's deadliest rail disaster in decades, all because of a 90-second delay. The derailment shook the city of Amagasaki like an earthquake. Locals who lived near the tracks heard a deafening crash, followed by a grinding roar as steel tore through concrete. Within moments, people were rushing toward the apartment building, horrified by what they saw. Train cars mangled like tin foil, passengers pinned inside, and smoke rising from the wreck. Inside the building's parking garage, the train had demolished several cars, spilling gasoline everywhere. Rescuers couldn't use tools that sparked, like saws or torches, for fear of igniting an explosion. That meant the work of freeing victims was painstakingly slow. Residents began pulling the less severely injured out through broken windows and doors, while the most critical cases were carried on stretchers to waiting ambulances. When ambulances ran out, taxis, police cars, and even flatbed trucks were commandeered to ferry survivors to hospitals. The Japanese Self-Defense Force joined the effort, digging through wreckage and helping stabilize the collapsed parts of the building. Emergency workers could hear cries for help from inside the crushed lead cars, but reaching them was almost impossible. Hours of desperate work followed as rescuers fought both the clock and the unstable wreckage. Of the roughly 700 people aboard, 107 would not survive, including everyone in the first 2 cars. Another 562 were injured, many left with life-changing disabilities. The survivors would later describe scenes of terror, people trapped in darkness, packed so tightly they couldn't move, calling out the names of loved ones or simply begging to be saved. By evening, the full scale of the disaster was becoming clear. It wasn't just a train crash, it was a national tragedy, one that left Japan questioning how a network so famous for its safety and punctuality could produce devastation on this scale. As the smoke cleared and the rescue ended, attention turned to the question everyone was asking: how could this have happened? The train had been travelling far too fast, 116 kilometers per hour, on a curve with a posted limit of just 70. All evidence pointed to driver error, but why would a 23-year-old, fit and healthy, with no medical conditions, push his train so recklessly? Investigators soon discovered the answer wasn't simply about speed, it was about fear. Employees who made mistakes were pulled from duty and subjected to humiliating menial tasks. Weeding gardens, cleaning toilets, or copying company manuals by hand for hours. Some were verbally abused, some even had their pay docked. Nobody knew how long the punishment would last. Weeks, sometimes months. And it hung over employees like a threat to their career. Takami had already been disciplined once before. Facing the prospect of being sent back for more education, he likely panicked. Investigators concluded that he had been trying desperately to claw back the 90-second delay, running the train at near maximum speed and ultimately losing control on the curve. In his final seconds, he applied the service brake but not the emergency brake. Why? Because pulling the emergency lever would have required him to justify it to superiors, exposing the fact that he had been speeding. His fear of the company's punishment culture, combined with his inexperience, likely sealed his fate, and tragically, the fate of 106 others.
Police officers combed through the Northeast New Territories landfill for choice arms and other body parts that are still missing. Security footage showed a suspect dumping bags, which police believe could contain important evidence. Rubbish collectors said the bags were taken to the landfill in Ta Kwu.
On February 21st, 2023, Hong Kong's fashion world was shaken when 28-year-old model Abby Choi suddenly vanished. Just days earlier, she'd been walking runways, appearing in glossy spreads for Vogue and Harper's Bazaar, her career skyrocketing and her personal life dazzling. But that afternoon, she was supposed to pick up her young daughter, and she never showed. Her husband, Chris Tam, grew worried when he couldn't reach her, and within hours, Abby was reported missing. At first, it looked like a strange but ordinary missing person case. Friends and family couldn't imagine Abby running off. She was deeply devoted to her children, and she lived a life where everything was public, from magazine covers to glamorous trips. But investigators quickly found something unsettling. Abby's last movements put her inside a car driven by Anthony Kwong Kong Kit, her former brother-in-law, who had once worked as her personal driver. Along the route, the car stopped, and Alex Kwong Kong Chi, Abby's ex-husband, got in. From that moment, Abby was never seen alive again. When police questioned Alex and Anthony, their stories didn't add up. Their answers were vague, inconsistent, and defensive, raising even more red flags. So investigators pushed further, tracing their movements to a small rented apartment in a quiet district of Tai Po. At first, police thought maybe Abby was being held there, possibly for ransom. But what they discovered inside that apartment was far worse than anyone could have imagined. When police finally pushed open the door to the small flat in Tai Po, they knew something was wrong the second they stepped inside. The air was thick, heavy, with a faint metallic sting that hinted at blood. What they found inside wasn't just a crime scene, it was a nightmare. Parts of Abby Choi's body were discovered in the refrigerator and soup pots, her remains gruesomely dismembered and hidden away, as if her killers had tried to erase her existence piece by piece. The officer stopped cold, stunned at the level of brutality. This wasn't a moment of rage or an accident, it was calculated. Every corner of that apartment told the same story. Abby's death had been carefully planned. And for the police, this wasn't just about solving a crime anymore. It was about uncovering how far hatred and greed could push a family. As investigators dug deeper, the picture became clearer and darker. Abby had been supporting her ex-husband, Alex Kwong, and his family financially for years, even after their divorce. But when Abby started making plans to sell a luxury property, one she had generously registered under her former father-in-law's name, the Kwongs felt threatened. To them, it wasn't just a house. It was a symbol of control, and they feared losing it would mean losing their comfortable lifestyle. Police quickly realized that greed was at the very heart of the murder. This wasn't random violence or a crime of passion. It was premeditated, driven by money and the resentment of a family unwilling to let go of the woman who had once been their lifeline. As suspicion closed in, the Kwong family's carefully spun lies started to crumble. Police first arrested Alex Kwong, Abby's ex-husband, along with his brother Anthony and their father, Kwong Kao. Soon after, Jenny Lee, their mother, was also taken into custody. Each of them was tied to the grisly plot in some way, from luring Abby to the house where she was attacked to covering up the crime and attempting to erase every trace of her. The arrest sent shockwaves through Hong Kong, not only because of the brutality of the murder, but also because Abby had continued to support these very people financially up until her death. The betrayal cut deep, and the community was left stunned that an entire family could turn on the woman who had once been their provider. Inside the tiny apartment in Tai Po, investigators were confronted with a scene that felt like a nightmare. Plastic sheeting covered every surface, as if the perpetrators had anticipated the horror their actions would create. Electric saws, a meat grinder, a hammer, and protective gear lay scattered around, tools of an unimaginable crime. Abby's handbag sat abandoned, a chilling reminder of the vibrant woman who had once carried it. Then came the discovery that would cement the Kwong family's guilt. In the fridge, human legs were stacked on the shelves. Pots contained what appeared to be soup, but were filled with human ribs and even a skull, the back of it showing a hole, likely from a hammer blow. Investigators pieced together the sequence. Abby was killed, dismembered, and her body parts meticulously organised for disposal. The apartment was no ordinary crime scene. It was a meticulously planned abattoir designed to minimise evidence and allow the perpetrators to escape. The scale of the violence and the cold precision with which it was carried out shocked the officers. Every detail, from the protective gear to the careful arrangement of body parts, spoke to a horrifyingly calculated plan. After the grim discoveries in Tai Po, the hunt for Alex Kwong intensified. Authorities knew he was the linchpin, the one who could tie the entire operation together. But Alex had vanished. It wasn't just a disappearance. It was a high-stakes escape plan straight out of a movie. Alex had retreated to another luxury flat, rented in the name of his mistress, Young. From there, he planned to flee Hong Kong by speedboat, armed with $60,000 in cash and luxury watches worth over $500,000. Surveillance and intelligence teams scrambled, knowing that catching him before he vanished into the water would be crucial. Meanwhile, Anthony Kwong and the rest of the family were under arrest, each piece of the puzzle slowly revealing the brutal reality of Abby's murder. Investigators traced the movements of the family in the days following Abby's disappearance. Anthony had driven the car, likely assisted in transporting her body, while Kwong Kao, her ex-father-in-law, appeared to have orchestrated the entire plot. As police combed through the small apartment and surrounding areas, Abby's story unfolded in horrifying clarity. 7 people had been implicated in the planning, execution, and attempted cover-up of her murder. The search even extended to the Trenkano Chinese Permanent Cemetery, where divers and drones scoured pools and terrain for additional remains. Each discovery painted a picture of premeditated cruelty, calculated to hide the evidence of their crimes and facilitate Alex's escape. Eventually, authorities intercepted Alex just as he was about to board the speedboat. The arrest was cinematic, like in a movie scene, but terrifyingly real. With his assets and escape plan in hand, he could have vanished into the night, leaving Abby's family and authorities grappling with the horror he had left behind.
There was a heart-wrenching moment when the model's mother cried that she would never see her daughter again. Choi's relatives had earlier visited the Fushan Public Mortuary to identify her.
Hello? My wife, she stopped breathing and trying to do CPR. I can't get her.
Listen to me.
This is Dan.
Your name is Dan?
David.
Okay, your name is David. Okay, who is it that's not breathing?
My wife. My wife,
Your wife is not breathing? Sir, I need you to take a deep breath. Take a deep breath. Listen to me. I'm going to get the paramedics so we can try and get her some help, okay? Don't hang up.
Alright, I'll just have you come on in here for right now. Just have a seat. I don't know how long they will be, okay? Did you have...
To use the bathroom?
Yeah, we can go there real quick. Yep, that's fine. Thank you. Just have a seat there, and as soon as I get here...
On April 24th, 2018, a frantic 911 call came in from a home in the upscale Delaney Park neighborhood of Orlando, Florida. On the line was 50-year-old David Trones, his voice shaky, claiming he had just found his wife, 39-year-old Shanti Cooper Trones, unresponsive in the bathtub. He told the operator he was trying CPR, that the water had been running, and that he couldn't get her to breathe. Police and paramedics rushed to the scene. Inside the garage apartment where the couple had been living during renovations, they found Shanti's body. At first glance, it looked like a tragic accident. Maybe she had slipped, fainted, or drowned. But almost immediately, things didn't add up. The tub wasn't overflowing like David claimed. Shanti's body was dry, her injuries didn't match a fall, and there were clear signs of trauma to her face and neck. This wasn't the scene of an accident. What made the moment even stranger was the setting. David and Shanti owned a massive house at 218 East Copeland Drive, but it was under endless renovation. For years, they had been living out of that small grey apartment while contractors came and went. Neighbours thought it odd, but nobody could have predicted that one day Shanti would be carried out of there on a stretcher, declared dead just minutes later. The call that began as a husband begging for help quickly spiraled into the opening of a homicide investigation. Shanti Cooper was the kind of woman who had built her life from the ground up. Born in 1980, she made her career in finance and even started her own company, helping manufacturers streamline their operations. But beyond her professional success, her world revolved around her young son, Jackson, whom she shared custody of after a divorce in 2013. Friends described her as hard-working, loyal, and someone who lit up whenever she talked about her boy. After her divorce, Shanti turned to online dating, where she met David Trones on Match.com. David, originally from Minneapolis, swept her off her feet. He told stories of wealth, millions inherited after a relative passed away, and promised her a life of comfort. Shanti believed him. By 2015, David had moved to Orlando, and together they bought the house on East Copeland Drive. Well, David bought it technically. His name and his mother's went on the deed, not Shanti's. That detail would become a sore point later. David was obsessed with the house. Renovating it became his full-time project, something that consumed him. Contractors cycled in and out, work stopped and started, and still nothing ever seemed finished. Meanwhile, Shanti footed most of the bills, over $250,000 worth, while David, who was supposedly a millionaire, hardly paid for groceries. By 2017, they were married, but cracks had already started to show. Friends noticed David's behaviour, manipulative, controlling, and often childish when things didn't go his way. Shanti, patient as she was, seemed to be carrying the weight of the marriage. To outsiders, the couple looked mismatched. She was grounded, professional, and family-driven, while he seemed to be chasing endless renovations and the fantasy of being on television. That fantasy was about to collide with reality. By 2017, David Trones had one dream that kept him going. He wanted their Orlando home to be featured on the TV show Zombie House Flipping. He was convinced that if cameras came rolling through, their half-renovated house would turn into a masterpiece, and he'd finally get the validation he craved. The problem was, Shanti wasn't buying it. She wanted stability, not a TV spectacle. The house, despite years of work, was still a mess, gutted in parts, unlivable in others, and draining money like a sieve. David's obsession with the renovation became the centerpiece of their fights. Shanti had already poured hundreds of thousands of dollars into the property, yet her name wasn't even on the deed. She'd sacrificed to keep things afloat, all while David hid behind his excuses and grand promises. Friends recalled how Shanti would vent about the never-ending construction, but David brushed it off, insisting everything was almost done. To make things worse, cracks in their marriage deepened. David had always painted himself as a wealthy, successful man, but the facade was crumbling. He spent more time fussing over the house than focusing on Shanti or their future. He wanted the spotlight of a reality TV show, while she just wanted a home. Behind closed doors, arguments turned bitter. Neighbours heard raised voices. Friends saw the tension every time they visited. David, once charming and full of big promises, was now a man cornered by lies of his own making, and Shanti was getting tired of living in a half-finished construction site with someone who couldn't back up his words with real action. The stage was set. Something had to give. By early 2019, Shanti had finally had enough of David's endless excuses and the strain of living in a half-finished house. What she didn't fully realise, however, was just how many lies David had been feeding her all along. He had presented himself as wealthy, claiming he had money to fund the renovation and their lifestyle. But the truth was far darker. David was broke. Almost everything, the mortgage, the renovations, the bills, was in Shanti's name, or funded by her hard-earned money. Friends began to notice the imbalance. Shanti confided in them, frustrated and exhausted, admitting she was carrying the financial weight of the relationship. Meanwhile, David continued to boast about his supposed fortune and grand future plans. It was all smoke and mirrors, and Shanti was slowly uncovering just how deep the deception ran. At the same time their marriage was collapsing. The couple was sleeping in separate rooms. Shanti, who had once been patient and hopeful, was now vocal about her unhappiness. The tension was no longer subtle, it was explosive. Arguments grew more frequent, and David's temper was quick to flare when confronted with the reality of his failures. By April 24th, 2018, that afternoon, David claimed he had been out walking the dogs and working on the house, only to return and find Shanti in the bathtub, water running, lifeless. Panic set in as he called 911, fumbling through explanations and concocting scenarios in his head about a possible accident, a fainting spell, anything that could mask what had really happened. But when police arrived and examined the scene, the story didn't add up. The tub was dry, her body dry, and there were bruises, lacerations, and clumps of hair missing, signs inconsistent with a simple fall or accident. Neighbours watched as the quiet, upscale Delaney Park community absorbed the shock, whispers spreading about what had gone wrong in that house. David's version of events unravelled under questioning. Inconsistencies piled up from the timing to the physical evidence, yet he maintained his story with a cold, calculated calm. Meanwhile, the mystery of $5,000 and Shanti's diamond engagement ring only added to suspicions, though David continued to insist that burglars were to blame, painting a picture of misfortune rather than intent.
This woman's head being swollen, her eyes being black and swollen, lacerations on her face where the blood has dried this way. Yet she's in a tub supposedly full with water. Clumps of hair missing from the back of her head. She didn't do this to herself, and there was nobody else there. We can forgive people for accidents, for nearly anything. But what we can't forgive is when somebody maintains that lie and that coldness.
The narrative of a tragic accident began to crumble as investigators slowly pieced together David's double life, his secrets, and the control he had exerted over Shanti, and the truth was creeping closer with every unanswered question. David's lies and secrets finally caught up with him. By August 2018, he was arrested for Shanti's murder, her diamond ring recovered in his possession. Over the next 5 years, he faced multiple competency evaluations, a schizophrenia diagnosis, and delays before trial. When the trial finally began in late 2023, the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder. Sentenced to life in prison, David's obsession with control, deception, and manipulation had cost Shanti her life. Her family and friends mourned, remembering the loving, dedicated mother she had been, while David faced the consequences of the double life he had led, a stark contrast to the passionate, controlling man he had pretended to be.